In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars. The morning sun hung low over Mercy's Crossing, casting long shadows of dilapidated buildings across its dusty main street. The air was heavy with the scent of smouldering iron and the sharp tang of sweat. Among the half-broken saloon doors and weather-worn storefronts stood a modest forge, its brick walls still blackened from years of labor. Within its interior, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil echoed like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. Elysia Thorne, the blacksmith, leaned over her workbench, her broad shoulders bared beneath a coarse linen shirt, darkened by soot. Her powerful arms moved with precise, practiced force, shaping a glowing horseshoe on the anvil. She was a woman of few words and fewer smiles, her dark eyes betraying the hardened resolve that had carried her through years of hardship. A blacksmith's apron covered the front of her sturdy leather pants, and her rugged boots were scuffed by countless steps across hot coals and iron shavings. Inside her mind, Elysia felt the familiar rush of purpose. Each strike of her hammer was a declaration, an affirmation that she belonged here, where iron surrendered to her will. She did not seek glory, nor did she crave praise. Mercy's Crossing was a place where survivors clung to hope by the thinnest of threads, and Elysia's forge was one of the few places where strength still mattered. Without warning, the creaking of the swinging saloon doors sent a ripple through the stillness. The forge's shutters rattled as a gust of wind swept dust across the floorboards. Elysia paused mid-strike, her keen ears attuned to the dissonance. Shadows lengthened at the threshold as three figures stepped inside, boots tapping against the hard-packed earth. They were bandits, scarred men with cold, merciless eyes and ragged coats adorned with bullets and rusted spurs. Each carried a Colt revolver. The barrels pointed casually at Elysia's torso, though their lips curled into cruel grins rather than furrowed brows. The tallest among them, a gaunt man with a twisted scar across his left cheek, spit to the side and extended a gloved hand. "Well, well, what do we have here? A lone blacksmith, toiling away like she thinks she's the queen of the West?" He sneered, his voice heavy with mockery. Elysia set her hammer aside with deliberate slowness. Sparks leapt from the anvil as the horseshoe she had shaped glowed bright against the dim interior. She met the bandit's gaze without wavering, her dark hair falling in a thick braid down her back. The silence stretched tautly, punctuated only by the distant creak of a sign swinging outside. "Name's Finn McCadden," the bandit said, striding forward so that the light caught the gleam of his revolver. "We've heard tales of a woman swinging a hammer like the angels themselves fear her. Didn't figure it for true until now." Elysia's lips pressed into a thin line. On most days, taunts were the smallest of annoyances, inconsequential as the dust swirling around her feet. But these men carried danger in their boots, and the smell of gunpowder on their belts told her they were not here for horseshoes. "You got business here?" she asked, her voice low and measured. It carried the weight of unspoken threats, the kind that didn't need words. Finn's scar twitched as he laughed. "Business? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But I'll tell you what, we're looking for a bit of entertainment. Turns out folks around here pay good money to watch a tussle. You up for a little show?" The other two bandits, slender, sallow-faced men named Jeb and Craw, exchanged glances. Jeb shifted the revolver in his hip holster, his fingers brushing the handle in a nervous twitch. Craw, the youngest, merely watched Elysia with a mixture of admiration and fear, as though she held some mythical power. Elysia picked up the horseshoe and held it by its cooler end, turning it over in her hand as though she weighed her options in that moment. Internally, her mind raced. She was strong, yes, stronger than most men who wandered into her forge uninvited, but fighting 3 gunmen, even skilled ones, was no trivial matter. Here, in Mercy's Crossing, a single misstep would be carved forever into the code of the living. A drop of sweat trickled down her temple, and she wiped it away with her knuckles. By the time she lifted her gaze again, Finn had holstered his revolver. "All we need you to do," Finn said, casually stepping forward until he stood within blade swinging distance, "is a simple duel, hammer against hammer. You swing a nail, we'll swing a bullet. See whose arm holds up longer." Fury pulsed in Alicia's chest, an ember of pure indignation. "I do not duel fugitives and cowards," she replied, her voice steely. "My hammer is not for sport." Finn raised an eyebrow. "Too proud for a fair fight? That's a pity." In the back of the forge, the door remained wide open, and through it, patrons of the saloon lingered, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Some reached for pistols beneath their own coats, others muttered prayers, unwilling to be drawn into violence. The wind rattled the sign of the forge of Elysia Thorn, as though whispering caution to every soul that dared approach. A sudden clang sounded from the anvil, and Jeb snorted with amusement. Tanking on some silent question, was this woman for real? He walked over to the anvil, snatched the glowing horseshoe from Elysia's hand, and tossed it aside. "Let's make this more interesting," he said. He cracked his knuckles and cocked, his head a slow grin forming. "We'll break your hammer, and the next time you swing, well, you won't have any tools left." Jeb's words dripped with malice. Elysia stepped forward, her boots scraping gravel. She could smell the sweat and whiskey on Jeb's breath as he leaned in, expecting her to tremble at the sight of his bulging forearms. But she stood unyielding. "Leave my forge," she said, her voice folded into the steel of her determination. "I have no quarrel with you beyond the ones you invent." "That's a shame," Craw suddenly interjected, his tone eerily calm. "'Cause we're not leaving until we draw blood." With a swift motion, the three bandits circled around Elysia. Jeb lunged first, arms swinging wide to encircle her in a bear hug, aiming to halt her movement. Craw slipped behind her, hands going for her hair to twist until she gave in to desperation. Finn raised his gun, finger caressing the trigger, but Elysia moved like a striking rattlesnake. As Jeb reached for her, she twisted at the waist, her elbow finding purchase in his kidney. A sharp grunt escaped his lips as he lost the wind in his lungs. He stumbled forward, giving her the brief opening she needed. Alicia's hammer, perched on a nearby rack, sang its metallic song as she grabbed it by the handle. In a single fluid motion, she spun around, striking out with the flat, face toward Finn. Her aim was not to kill, but to disarm. A resounding crack echoed against the wood walls as Finn's gun flew from his hand, spinning into the dust. Craw's fingers clenched tighter in her braid, pulling her head back. Pain shot through Elysia's skull, but she refused to yield. With her free arm, she rammed her knee into Craw's thigh, eliciting a howl of agony. As he dropped his grip, she twisted from his hold and lashed out with the hammer's claw, raking it across his forearm. Blood blossomed, and Craw's face paled. Suddenly, the forge doors slammed open. Universal chaos erupted as townsfolk flooded inside. Miners, farmers, a few dusty children whose eyes widened at the violent ballet. Sheriff McAllister lumbered through the crowd, badge gleaming in the morning light. His revolver was drawn, but he hesitated, recognizing Elysia's hammer raised high above her head. "Hold it, Thorn," he bellowed. "This is my fight now." Elysia hesitated, eyes still locked on Finn, whose face had twisted from arrogance to fear. The sheriff strode forward, planting himself between the combatants. Behind him, deputies fanned out, their own guns holstered with cautious restraint. In that heartbeat, Elysia did not consider her pounding heart or the aches in her muscles. Her mind settled on one immutable truth. She would not let these men, desecrate her forge. She lowered the hammer, her gaze still wary, but she ceased her attacks. Finn, Jeb, and Craw lay sprawled on the wooden floor, breathing raggedly, dread etched into every feature. Sheriff McAllister cuffed Jeb and Craw, his voice dripping with contempt. "You boys picked on the wrong woman this time. Step outside. Maybe I'll think twice before you wander into Mercy's Crossing again." Finn, bruised and humiliated, spat blood onto the floor. "You hear me, Thorn? This ain't over. We'll be back soon, and when we do—" He broke off, a flurry of curses dying on his lips as the sheriff yanked him away. Alicia stood amid the wreckage of her forge, her hammer's handle quivering slightly in her gloved hands. Sparks danced from the coals near her feet, reflecting the tumult inside her chest. The townsfolk stared in awe, some stepping forward to help steady her, while others simply watched, unsure whether to cheer or flee. When the last of the bandits was hauled away, Alicia's gaze fell on the horseshoe she had been crafting. It lay half-formed and misshapen on the anvil, a glaring metaphor. Her work interrupted, her peace shattered. She exhaled slowly, her breath pluming in the cool morning air. In the hush that followed, a child's voice whispered, "Ma'am, you're a hero." Alicia's jaw clenched, and she knelt by the anvil. She picked up the horseshoe, feeling its metal pulse beneath her fingertips. "I'm no hero," she replied, her voice soft yet resolute. "Just a hammer, and sometimes that's enough." She rose, slipping the horseshoe into her toolbox. But next time they come, they'll find more than an old forge waiting for them. The sun had climbed higher, its light burning away the morning chill. Alicia locked eyes with the sheriff as he pocketed his badge and nodded. She offered a small, grim smile, but her heart was already hardened for what lay ahead. Mercy's Crossing was not kind to dreamers, or to those who dared stand tall. She would need every ounce of strength, every echo of that hammer's ring, to face the storm gathering over the dusty horizon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The morning light in Mercy's Crossing had softened, the harsh glare of high sun yielding to a pale brilliance that soaked into every crevice of the dusty town. Within the forge, Alicia Thorne surveyed the aftermath of yesterday's chaos. The horseshoe she'd abandoned still lay on the workbench, its metal cooled and dull, a testament to how quickly routine could fracture. Her muscles were still sore, the ache in her shoulders a constant reminder of her fierce defense. Each breath she drew found a hollow in her chest, as though the air itself was laced with anticipation. She moved with deliberate care, tending to the forge's coals. Each ember seemed to pulse with memory, the echo of hammer against metal, the ricochet of bullets against wood, the clang of iron on iron. Her fingertips brushed the worn handle of her hammer, almost hesitating before she lifted it. It was heavier than she remembered. Grief lent weight to familiar tools. In the previous hours, she had rebuilt the anvil's footing, repaired broken bricks, and gathered fresh supplies of charcoal and bellows. Even as she went about these tasks, the image of Finn McCadden's twisted grin lingered in her mind. She paused, closing her eyes as the wind howled against the forge's shutters. There was a time before Mercy's Crossing when she had not known the sting of strangers' cruelty, but Mercy's Crossing had a way of breaking souls, forcing them to either bend or shatter. Alicia had chosen to bend her pain into steel and strength. The smithy was not just her trade, it was her very essence. It had shaped her like a blade tempered by fire. The front door swung open, and Hannah Walters stepped inside, a slender woman whose gentle eyes carried the softness of morning dew. Hannah was Mercy's Crossing's only schoolteacher, but she had once been a healer in the Northern Territories. Rumors of her previous life drifted like embers, that she had tended to wounded soldiers, stitched flesh and spirit alike. Now she relied on chalk and books, teaching children to read and write beneath the creaking beams of an abandoned chapel converted into a one-room schoolhouse. Hannah's hair, long and wispy, fell loosely around her shoulders. She wore a pale, blue dress that fluttered like a wave in the breeze. There was something healing about her presence, a balm to Alicia's hardened soul. Yet Alicia welcomed her friend with guarded warmth. They had forged a tentative bond, one woven from mutual respect and unspoken understanding. "Morning, Alicia," Hannah said softly, closing the forge door against the wind. "How are you faring?" "Battered," Alicia admitted, her voice hushed. "But I'll endure." Hannah stepped closer, glancing at the horseshoe. "I heard from Sheriff McAllister that you defended the forge. The entire town is still talking about it." Alicia's jaw clenched. "I did what I had to. They threatened my livelihood, my home. This is all I have." Hannah nodded, but her gaze held worry. "Finn McCadden and his gang won't forget this." Alicia exhaled a slow breath, her fingertips tightening around the hammer's handle. "They'll come back, and next time I need to be ready, not just with bravado and anger." She paused, searching for the right words. "I need a plan." Hannah's expression softened further. "I might have something." Alicia tilted her head, allowing the soft light to illuminate the lines on Hannah's face, as though she were mapping her friend's soul. "Go on." Hannah placed a gentle hand on Alicia's shoulder. "My uncle Alistair still lives up in the hills, just beyond Mercy's Crossing. He's a retired gunsmith and mechanic. He helped me when I was wounded last year. He knows more about weapons than anyone I've ever met. If you could find him, maybe he could offer counsel on defending against Finn and his men." Alicia's brow furrowed. The hills beyond Mercy's Crossing were treacherous, with winding trails and hidden gorges. But the thought of meeting someone who could sharpen her edge, both figuratively and literally, stirred a determination inside her that could not be quelled. "Tell me where he is." Hannah unfolded a crumpled map, its creases worn from frequent reference. She pointed to a small cabin nestled on the western slope, half hidden by cedar trees. "He lives here, alone. Sometimes he travels to the city, but mostly he's holed up. He's cautious. But if I vouch for you, he'll at least meet." Alicia studied the map for a long moment, memorizing the twists of the trail, the shallow river crossing, the narrow defiles that cut through rock. "I leave at dawn." Hannah nodded, but only after a hesitance lingered in her eyes. "Be careful. He's a gentleman, but he's been battle-worn, and Mercy's Crossing isn't forgiving." Alicia did not respond, turning back to the forge. Over the next hours, she worked methodically, shaping a new horseshoe, repairing a cracked plowshare, and reinforcing the iron frame of a gate. Yet even as she hammered, her mind traced the path through the hills. She constructed mental checklists: food, water, bedroll, weapons, and most importantly, a surge of trust in Hannah's judgment. That night, beneath a canopy of pinprick stars, Alicia lay on a makeshift cot in her narrow back room. The forge's embers glowed faintly through the shuttered windows. Each exchange of memory or strategy with Hannah had stirred something she'd tried to suppress: fear of losing what little she had reclaimed. She stared at the wooden ceiling, as though the cracks and grain could reveal the future in their silent lines. Dawn arrived on the wings of a lonesome crow. Alicia strapped her rifle to her back, slung a sack of supplies across her shoulder, and stepped into the chill air. She walked through the silent street, the only sound her boots crunching against frost-hardened gravel. The townsfolk stirred but kept their distance. Rumors of Finn's return had already begun to ripple through Mercy's Crossing. As she reached the edge of town, the terrain shifted abruptly. Tamarisk bushes entwined with sagebrush, and the ground rose in sudden jagged hills. The wind carried a tang of pine and a distant echo of gunfire from the training grounds where deputies took target practice. But Elysia's focus remained locked on the trail ahead, each step taking her farther from safety. The first miles passed without event. Elysia's mind was a ledger of calculations, distance covered, perishable goods rationed, the next safe place to camp. At midday, she paused at a creek bed where water ran clear over smooth stones. She knelt, cupped her calloused hands, and drank deeply. Above her, a hawk circled, its cry slicing the air. She allowed herself a moment to rest, gazing at her reflection in the creek's surface. The sun flickered across her dark hair, and the early scars on her face seemed to shimmer with memory. She traced a fingertip over the faint line above her eyebrow, where an errant nail had once struck her. It was a reminder that metal and flesh both yielded to force. But she had bent, not broken. Beyond the creek, the trail narrowed, hemmed in by steep slopes and loose shale. Elysia's knuckles whitened as she gripped a tree root for support. Each step required the precision of a dancer and the resolve of a survivor. Every clank of her boots against rock felt amplified, as though the hills themselves listened. By dusk, the sky had become a canvas of violet and gold. Elysia spotted the cabin's silhouette against the fading light. A small, log-constructed building with a chimney that puffed thin clouds of smoke into the dusk. She approached cautiously, her rifle loose in one hand, her gaze trained for potential threats. A figure emerged, older than she'd imagined, hair silvered like moonlight, face lined yet calm. Uncle Alistair's eyes held a kindness tempered by years of hardship. "Hannah sent word," he called out, his voice rough but welcoming. "Elysia Thorne, is it?" Elysia stepped forward, keeping her shoulders squared. "Yes." He motioned her closer. "Come inside. The nights get cold up here and there's much to discuss." The cabin's interior was cluttered but orderly. Shelves lined with metallic components, gun barrels, hammers and tools, reflected the warm glow of a single oil lamp. Fish scales hung from a rack near the hearth, alongside hunting trophies, a deer's head, a coyote pelt, and a hawk's talons. "Tea?" Alistair offered, pouring hot water into a chipped tin mug. He passed it to Elysia, who accepted with a nod. "Of thanks." She scanned his workshop, a sturdy workbench strewn with machine parts, specialized springs, and boxes of cartridges. Alistair moved to a cabinet and retrieved a worn leather satchel. He opened it to reveal an array of custom knives, a pair of revolvers, still oiled and lustrous, and what appeared to be a finely crafted metal gauntlet. "These belong to my father," Alistair said quietly, "a master gunsmith. Each piece was made for more than function. It was meant to protect." Elysia studied the revolvers, their irony ornamentation inlaid with silver. They were balanced, precise tools, far superior to the crude pistols the McCadden gang wielded. "I can teach you," Alistair continued, "but it's not just about weapons. Finn is clever. He'll target your weaknesses. You need to learn tactics, how to fortify your forge, ally with the townsfolk, and if necessary, lay traps." Elysia allowed, a flicker of hope to rise. "What do you need from me?" Alistair's gaze hardened. "Trust and willingness to endure. This won't be easy." She lifted her chin. "I didn't survive this long by turning away from a challenge." He nodded and led her outside. The night sky was a tapestry of stars, and the cold seeped through Elysia's shirt. But she felt embers of determination burning inside her chest, stronger than any chill. The next days passed in a blur of training and preparation. Each dawn, Elysia honed her marksmanship under Alistair's watchful eye. By midday, she practiced quick reloads and proper stances, learning to account for recoil and wind. As evening fell, they returned to the forge, Alistair's tools and Elysia's hammer working in concert. Together, they reinforced the forge's entry points with iron bars and built a hidden stockpile of ammunition. During one late afternoon practice, as Elysia fired at targets fashioned from tin cans, she felt a crack in her resolve. The noise of each shot reverberated through her bones, reminding her of every life she had taken, or almost taken, to survive. She paused, eyes brimming with doubt. Alistair approached, his gait measured but firm. "Still thinking about yesterday?" Elysia nodded, lowering her revolver. "I've never fired a weapon like this in anger." He placed a worn hand on her shoulder. "This town needs you more than you know, but you need to know how to control the weapon. It's an extension of your will, much like your hammer." She inhaled slowly, letting the mountain air fill her lungs. "I will learn." His eyes softened. "Good, because they're coming, Elysia. Your stand at the forge." They saw that. It spread like wildfire. "Finn won't stop until he tears you down." That night, in the quiet solitude of her tent near the cabin, Elysia felt the weight of Alistair's words. Her mind churned with possible scenarios: bandits surrounding the forge at dawn, a raid in the dead of night, a betrayal from someone she trusted. Fear was a constant companion, but she refused to let it rule her. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, letting her heartbeat slow. She pictured the hammer's arc, the revolver's precise recoil, the feel of iron beneath her fingertips. On the 7th day of her training, Alistair declared she was ready to return. He stood at the cabin's door, arms crossed against his chest. "What about you?" Elysia asked. "Will you come with me?" He shook his head, a tinge of sadness in his eyes. "Hannah needs me here. The children are anxious. Some talk of fleeing if Finn returns, but you know what to do. Trust in your strength. And when the time comes, fight with honor, not malice." Elysia squared her shoulders. "I'll make sure Mercy's Crossing has a fighting chance." Alistair handed her a small black leather pouch. "Inside is silver dust, enough to blind an approaching foe momentarily. Keep it hidden until you need it." She gripped the pouch. "Thank you." Mounting her horse, she took one last look at the cabin, a beacon of refuge in the rugged hills, and rode downhill toward Mercy's Crossing. As the trail descended, the wind carried a portent of change. The town's silhouette emerged in the distance, its dusty skyline punctuated by the steeple of Hannah's schoolhouse. Elysia urged her horse forward, heart pounding with purpose. As she neared the outskirts, she spotted a detachment of deputies across the crisp morning sun. Sheriff McAllister and his men in the town square, drilling in formation. They raised their rifles in synchronized motion, the reports echoing like thunder through the air. It was a display of resolve, but Elysia knew that raw power alone would not shield the townspeople. With a quiet resolve, she rode into the square. All eyes turned to her, noting the new scabbards at her hips and the hardened determination in her gaze. Sheriff McAllister approached, tipping his hat. "Thorne, you're back." Elysia dismounted smoothly. "We've fortified the forge. I've improved the defenses, and I have weapons now, better than theirs." McAllister's brow furrowed. "Bandits have been spotted near Devil's Drop. They'll be here by tomorrow night." Elysia nodded. "Then we prepare." Over the following hours, she worked side by side with deputies and townsfolk. She oversaw the construction of barricades, sturdy logs and sandbags arrayed before the forge's entrance. Alistair's bright iron bars were fitted across windows, and a hidden compartment beneath the smithy's floor was stocked with extra ammunition. She drilled citizens, farmers and shopkeepers alike in basic maneuvers, reloading, aiming, and what to do if the forge fell. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mercy's Crossing transformed from a dusty town into a makeshift fortress. Lanterns flickered along barricades, and the townsfolk gathered in small clusters, their hushed conversations laced with apprehension. The air tasted of cedar smoke, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. Elysia retreated to the forge's interior, checking the priming of her revolvers. The hammer felt good in her grip, familiar, reassuring. She glanced at the hidden pouch in her jacket and tapped it lightly. Silver dust, a last resort. Night fell, and the town fell silent, as though holding its breath. Behind her, the anvil sat cold, waiting. In the distance, a lone coyote howled, a chilling reminder of the valley's wildness. Alicia drew her breath deep and stepped outside, taking up position behind the barricade. Moments passed in a suspended hush. Then, on the northern horizon, a column of dust rose. Mounted figures emerged, gaunt silhouettes against the moonlit sky. The Macadam banner, once drab and rumpled, now fluttered defiantly. Finn Macadam, flanked by Jeb and Craw, led the charge atop a black stallion. His eyes glowed with vengeful determination as he surveyed the makeshift defenses. 20 of his men fanned out behind him, revolvers drawn and malice etched on every face. Finn dismounted, and the two sides locked eyes. The sheriff stepped forward with deputies arrayed, rifles at the ready. But it was Alicia who stood at the heart of it, stoic, a figure defined by quiet resolve and unyielding strength. Finn spat onto the ground, a gesture of contempt. "Alicia Thorne," he called out, voice carrying through the stillness. "I see you. Brought friends and a decent barricade, but tomorrow this place will be ours." Alicia took a measured step forward, her revolver resting in one hand and her hammer in the other. "Leave Mercy's Crossing. My forge is not yours to burn, and my people are not yours to harm. You have until dawn." Laughter rippled through Finn's men, low and mocking. Jeb sneered, stepping forward. "You think you can stop us with that hammer of yours?" Craw held a lantern high, casting flickering light across the barricade. "We'll see how brave you are when the bullets start flying." Alicia's gaze remained fixed on Finn, and the moonlight revealed the faintest curve at the corner of her lips, an unspoken promise that she would not yield. Her heart thudded, each beat a drum of defiance. Night stretched into an unbearable. Il pause. Then, as the first light of dawn painted the sky with bruised purples and fiery pinks, Finn raised his horned flask, taking a slow swig before the signal. Chaos erupted. The Macadam bandits surged forward, revolvers spitting fire. Deputies fired back, the thunderous volley echoing off the wooden facades of the town buildings. Mercy's Crossing became a storm of smoke, noise, and the acrid stench of gunpowder. Alicia remained behind the barricade, lowering herself into a squat. She aimed with careful precision, her fingers steady despite the roil of adrenaline in her veins. Each shot found its mark, stopping bandits by the dozen, but every life taken bore a weight she could never dismiss. Near the forge's entrance, Jeb and Craw darted through the chaos, bullets whizzing past their heads. Jeb's revolver barked, chipping a brick from the forge wall as Alicia raised her arm, the revolver's muzzle spitting lead. Jeb's chest erupted with a dark bloom, and he crumpled into the dust. Craw screamed, staggering backward before crashing into the barricade. A dozen bandits lay stunned or dead by the time Alicia's revolver clicked empty. She snapped it closed and reached for her hammer, slipping it from the barricade's edge. Her breath came in ragged pants as she wiped sweat from her brow. Finn, realizing the tide had shifted, retreated behind cover with 3 men at his side. They found refuge behind a felled wagon, the wounded bandits moaning on the ground around them. Finn's gaze locked onto Alicia, a mix of fury and fear in his bloodshot eyes. He barked orders low so that only his immediate men could hear. "Fall back! Regroup at the ridge! We'll come at them from the east!" But Sheriff McAllister's deputies were already flanking the ridge, cutting off the escape route. The few surviving bandits melted into the hills, abandoning their wounded. "And they're fallen." Finn's face contorted with rage as he saw defeat crystallize around him. He spat again, then disappeared into the undulating hills under cover of a rising sun. Alicia watched him go, her chest heaving with relief and something deeper, loss, guilt. Her knees trembled as she surveyed the aftermath. Battered barricades, splintered wood, and the bodies of men who had chosen violence. Hannah appeared at her side, eyes wide with both pride and horror. "Elysia, you did it!" Elysia set her hammer on the dirt, kneeling beside a wounded deputy. She tore a strip from her shirt and pressed it against his bleeding shoulder. "We did it," she corrected, voice soft. "Together." The sun rose higher, illuminating the battered town. Mercy's Crossing had survived the first wave, but the cost was etched into every face, every shattered window, every spent shell casing glittering in the dust. Meanwhile, beyond the ridge, Finn McCadden pressed a hand to the fresh wound on his arm, staring at Mercy's Crossing. His lips twisted into a snarl of promise. He would return, more ruthless than ever, and when he did, Elysia Thorne would face a storm that could burn her, forged to ash. The dawn after the battle brought a brittle quiet over Mercy's Crossing. Sunlight burned through the morning mist, illuminating the smouldering remnants of barricades and the blackened earth where gunfire had scorched the soil. Elysia Thorne stood before the forge, its sturdy frame battered but intact. The air tasted of ash and sweat, and each inhalation was a reminder of the violence that had erupted hours before. Even as the townsfolk began their somber work, burying the dead, tending to the wounded and clearing debris, Elysia lingered. By her forge's entrance, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the hills rose like silent sentinels. She could still hear the echo of revolver shots, the cries of men felled by her hand and hers alone. Each life taken weighed heavily on her conscience, but she had chosen this path. She had chosen to defend those she cared about. A group of deputies marched toward her, led by Sheriff McAllister. Their faces were grave, streaked with dirt and remnants of dried blood. Their black hats hung low, creating shadows that masked their expressions. "Thorne," McAllister began, his voice no more than a hushed growl. "We need to know. You're sure Finn McCadden and his men retreated back into the hills?" Elysia nodded, her features set like flint. "They've fled toward Devil's Drop. They'll try to regroup and come back with more reinforcements." The sheriff exchanged a look with his deputies. "We'll send a posse to intercept them, but it won't be long before they return. We need long-term plans. How prepared are you to fight?" "Another day?" She met his gaze squarely. "As long as my hammer stands, I will fight to protect Mercy's Crossing. But we need allies, people who can hold ground if I'm busy." McAllister stroked his grizzled beard, weighing her words. "We've been reaching out to neighboring towns, sending messengers for reinforcements, but most are either unwilling or too afraid of McCadden's reach. His bandits run like a plague across the southern territories." Elysia clenched her jaw, recalling the sting of isolation she had felt when she first arrived in Mercy's Crossing. She was a stranger in a town that trusted few and believed less. But now, after the battle, her presence had transformed from a curiosity to a symbol of defiance. "Then we build alliances," Elysia said softly, more to herself than to the sheriff. "I'll ride out and speak to the other towns. Tell them Finn McCadden will not be contained unless we stand together." Hannah appeared at her side, carrying a bundle of bandages. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She knelt beside a wounded deputy, lying on a makeshift cot beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree. "Elysia, you can't do this alone," Hannah urged, pressing gauze into a deep laceration. "We're already stretched thin. You need time to rest." Elysia's gaze softened. "Rest? Mercy's Crossing can't rest, not when the shadow of McCadden looms. We need to break his hold on fear." The deputy groaned at Hannah's attention, his breathing shallow. Nearby, other townsfolk watched with a mixture of hope and dread. Hope that Elysia could turn the tide, and dread at the thought of more bloodshed. By midday, Elysia had gathered her provisions: bedroll, rations, basic supplies, and Alistair's leather pouch of silver dust. She strapped her rifle to her back, tied a sheath to her belt that held a pair of finely crafted knives, and settled into her saddle. Hannah accompanied her to the forge's entrance, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders to ward off the lingering. "A chill. Promise me you'll come back," Hannah said, her voice catching. "Mercy's Crossing needs you." Alicia placed a sturdy hand on Hannah's arm. "I'll come back stronger, I promise." She nudged her horse forward, leaving the forge behind, as she set off toward the south. Her plan was simple: visit 2 neighboring towns, Broken Ridge to the southeast and Iron Rock to the southwest, before making her way to Sparrow's Gulch. Each place was known for its fiercely independent people, but their collective fear of McCadden's bandits had stifled any attempts at unity. The trail to Broken Ridge wound through rocky terrain, the soil dry and cracked from months without rain. Alicia's thoughts drifting to the events that had drawn her to shield Mercy's Crossing in the first place, the early years after her father's death, when she had apprenticed at a forge far south. She had witnessed how hunger and desperation could turn men to banditry, yet she had never imagined she would end up standing against a man like Finn McCadden, a man who thrived on intimidation. At mid-afternoon, she spotted a cluster of simple wooden homes nestled between 2 craggy peaks. Broken Ridge lived up to its name, a scattering of structures built from salvaged planks, with chimneys coughing smoke into the waning light. A thin plume of dust marked the trail from Iron Rock to the west. As Alicia rode into the town square of Broken Ridge, she felt every eye turn toward her, some curious, some wary. She dismounted near a central well, her boots crunching against the gravel. A local deputy walked toward her, revolver hanging at his hip. "You Thorne?" he called, his voice laced with skepticism. "Yes," Alicia replied, keeping her tone even. "I come from Mercy's Crossing to ask for your help." The deputy's eyes narrowed. "Most folks around here heard about Mercy's Crossing. They said you took on McCadden's men single-handedly." She bristled. "As a matter of fact, I did. But McCadden is as much a threat to Broken Ridge as he is to Mercy's Crossing. I'm here to propose an alliance." He spat to the side. "Alliances mean commitments, men, ammunition, provisions. We don't have much to spare. Unless he's riding in here to kill us, we mind our own business." Alicia sighed, her patience thinning. She met his gaze squarely. "Then you'll also mind your own graves. McCadden will not rest until he subjugates every town that stands in his path. Stand with me now, or become his next trophies." Her words hung in the air like a blade. The deputy glanced at a nearby group of townsfolk who had gathered at the square's edge. Miners in dusty overalls, their faces etched with worry, and women clutching baskets of bread. Their murmurs reflected a blend of fear and hope. Before the deputy could respond, a rough voice crackled from the back of the crowd. "Let her speak. I'm Jasper Holt, head of the Miners' Guild. If McCadden takes Mercy's Crossing, his reach extends here." A woman stepped forward, a lean figure with calloused hands and a determined glint in her eyes. She introduced herself as Maura Finch, the owner of the Broken Ridge General Store. "Resources are scarce, but we have grit. If Mercy's Crossing falls, our shipments of ore will be next, and we can't let that happen." Alicia nodded. Public declarations of unity were rare in these parts. Merchants and miners alike often clashed over territory and profits. But the sight of Maura Finch standing beside Jasper Holt spoke volumes. For the first time since she'd arrived, Alicia saw the spark of solidarity flicker in the hearts of these people. "All right," the deputy conceded, his voice thick with resignation. "We'll send 20 men to Mercy's Crossing. They'll train under your guidance." Alicia allowed herself a brief nod of gratitude. "We leave at first light tomorrow. I'll ride with them." Broken Ridge rallied that evening. Preparations were swift and surprisingly orderly. The clang of hammers repairing wagons, the clatter of rifles being cleaned, and the smell of fresh bread baking in the general store's oven filled the air. For the first time, Alicia believed Mercy's Crossing might not stand alone. She returned to the high hills overlooking Broken Ridge and set camp for the night. As she stirred a small pot of coffee over the campfire, her mind churned with possibilities. With a token force from Broken Ridge, she could establish a supply line to Mercy's Crossing, fortify defenses, and train civilian militias. But she knew this was only the beginning. Alistair had taught her more than just firearms and fortifications. He had taught her the value of unity, a lesson she intended to carry forward. Late that night, as Alicia settled into her bedroll, she sensed movement outside the firelit glow. The faint rustle of wind through sagebrush mingled with something else, a silent footstep. "Who's there?" Alicia whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for her revolver. A voice answered, low and familiar, "Alicia." Hannah stepped into the firelight, her shawl drawn tight against the rising breeze. "I couldn't sit idly by. I had to come with you." Alicia blinked, surprised but grateful. "You should have stayed in Mercy's Crossing. People need you there." Hannah shook her head. "I can teach the wounded to carry rifles. I can mend broken bodies and broken spirits. We need every hand we can get. Let me help." Alicia studied her friend beneath the flickering light. "Okay, but promise me you'll stay behind cover if things get rough. I won't let you wander into the thick of it." Hannah offered a small smile. "I've learned to look after myself." They sat in companionable silence, watching sparks drift skyward until the embers died down. The wilderness held its breath around them, as though wary of the brewing storm. A scene should... The next morning's light was crisp and clear, the valley floor bathed in gold. Alicia, Hannah, and the 20 volunteers from Broken Ridge rode south in formation, a ragtag cavalry of wagons carrying ammunition and supplies following close behind. Alicia felt a swelling pride in her chest. These people had chosen to stand rather than cower. They arrived at Mercy's Crossing by midday. The town had prepared for their return. All windows were shuttered, barrels were stacked against walls, and armed residents lined the streets. When the Broken Ridge contingent rode in, quiet cheers rippled through the assembled townsfolk. Sheriff McAllister met them in the square. "Good work, Thorne. We could use this reinforcements." Alicia spurred her horse forward, rallying her new allies. She began directing them to strategic positions, the saloon's upper floor to serve as a lookout, the granary's thick doors to guard against intruders, and the rooftops of empty buildings to provide sniper vantage points. She and Hannah worked side by side, drilling men on reloading and aiming. As dusk approached, shadows lengthened across Mercy's Crossing. Alicia's eyes flicked to the hills beyond, the same hills that had sheltered Finn and his men. Her mind drifted to the silver dust in Alistair's pouch. It was a powder bound to turn any approach into confusion and chaos, but she hoped it would not come to that. Hannah approached, holding a wrapped bundle. "Food from the general store. I thought you could use a meal." Alicia accepted it with a nod. "Thanks." They found a small alley behind the forge where they could eat in relative privacy. Hannah unwrapped fresh bread, cheese, and a small pot of stew. "You're a miracle, you know that?" Hannah said, handing Alicia a hunk of bread. Alicia shook her head, taking a bite. "I'm no miracle. I'm just a blacksmith who got tired of watching people get hurt." Hannah's eyes glistened as she swallowed. "You've given us all hope." They ate in silence for a few moments, listening to the distant sounds of preparation. The shuffle of ammunition boxes, the creak of wagons, the occasional crack of practice shots. "Do you ever wonder if we can really win?" Hannah asked. Elysia paused, her gaze drifting to the forge's battered anvil. I don't know, but I have to believe we can. Otherwise, this fight is already lost. Hannah nodded, offering a small smile. I'll stand by you. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Night fell swiftly, and Mercy's crossing settled into tense anticipation. The silence was punctured only by furtive footsteps and whispered prayers. Elysia stood atop the forge's roof with Hannah, peering out at the pitch-black hills. The wind carried a faint rumble, horses' hooves perhaps, or the low murmur of voices converging on the town. Elysia's heart hammered as she gripped the iron rail. They're coming! High above, the sky was a veil of coal, and the moon hung like a lantern in the heavens. Below, the townsfolk huddled behind their defences, rifles resting on barrels, bows strung and arrows fletched, even a few homemade explosive devices smeared with Alistair's silver dust. From the ridge to the north, a glint of steel flickered. In the moonlight, a distant torch, perhaps, or the reflection of metal. Elysia studied it, her breath catching. The shape solidified, dozens of mounted figures moving in deliberate formation, riding as one toward their prey. Hannah's hand found Elysia's arm, her grip trembling. Elysia, we need to warn everyone. She nodded, pulling a small whistle from her belt and giving it a sharp blow. The high note cut through the stillness. On the streets below, guards recognized the signal and sounded horns. Lanterns flicked on, illuminating the darkened facades. Elysia raced down the ladder to the anvil, vaulted over the barricade, and sprinted toward the saloon, shouting orders. "Take your positions! Watch the rooftops!" The first riders crested the horizon, their forms emerging like spectres against the moonlit hills. Finn McAdden rode in the center, his gaunt face masked by a wide-brimmed hat and a red kerchief. His eyes gleamed with anticipation. At his side, Craw rode, still clutching, the forearm scar where Elysia's hammer had drawn blood. He glared at Mercy's crossing, his face contorted with rage and a hunger for revenge. Behind them, the rest of the bandits spread out in a wedge formation, revolvers glinting in readiness. Elysia took a deep breath, her heart steadying. She unslung her rifle and raised it to her shoulder, taking careful aim. Hannah appeared at her side, a quiver of arrows slung across her back. The first volley of shots rang out, sparks exploding across the dusty street. Elysia ducked behind a wooden crate, returning fire with deliberate precision. Bullets chipped at the forge's iron bars, sending splinters cascading like rain. Hannah loosed arrow after arrow, each one finding a mark. A horse's flank, a bandit's shoulder cutting off their approach. The bandits faltered, but Finn raised his hand and signaled them onward. Elysia spotted Craw at the head of the charge, his revolver aimed at her. She fired, her bullet striking him in the thigh. Craw howled. Toppling from his saddle, the rest of the bandits surrounded him and dragged him up, rallying behind their leader. Finn spurred his horse forward, determined to face Elysia face to face. He raised his revolver, and the two traded shots. Sparks danced off the forges. Shuttered windows as their bullets collided. Elysia's heartbeat was a drum in her ears. She steadied her aim, her finger clenching the trigger. The world narrowed until only Finn's silhouette remained, taunting her. Just as Elysia squeezed the trigger, a sudden flash erupted to her left. A cloud of silver-dusted smoke billowed. Across the street, blinding bandits and townsfolk alike. Screams echoed as men stumbled in confusion, bullets whizzing blindly. Hannah, hidden in the alley, had cast a handful of powder into a brazier, igniting it with a match. The silver dust had done its work. sowing chaos and fear among the attackers. Alicia seized the moment. She sprang from cover, her rifle blazing. Each shot found its mark, cutting down bandits as they reeled from the blinding blast. The town fell into a cacophony of screams, some of terror, some of rage. Up ahead, Finn reeled from his horse, staggered, and fell to one knee. Elysia advanced, her rifle held steady. He turned, panting, his hat falling back to reveal haunted eyes. "You again?" he spat, his voice ragged. "You—" But Elysia did not give him the chance to finish. Her hammer, heavier and more resolute than before, whistled through the air as she swung it with all her strength, catching Finn's revolver arm and sending his weapon flying. He dropped to the ground in agony, clutching his arm where iron met. Flesh, Elysia's boots pounded against the wooden boards as she advanced. Finn snarled, but no hint of triumph remained in his eyes. Only fear. As she reached him, she raised the hammer again. His eyes widened with the realization that the legend of the blacksmith was no longer a rumor. With a final thunderous blow, Elysia struck Finn's revolver hand. The hammer's face crushed bone, driving her foe's scream into the night. Blood darkened the street as Finn slumped, unconscious and broken. Around them, the surviving bandits hesitated. Some surrendered, others fled into the hills. Elysia stood over Finn's body, her breathing slow and controlled. The world felt hollow, as though her victory had taken something essential from her. Suddenly, a distant shot rang out, a cry of triumph from one of her allies on the rooftops. The bandits retreated, leaving Finn's broken form behind. Elysia's legs trembled as she surveyed the battlefield. Mercy's Crossing had survived again, but the cost was unimaginable. Lives lost, spirits tested, and an enemy whose very existence challenged the peace of every town in the territory. Hannah rushed forward, tears in her eyes as she knelt beside. "Elysia, you're hurt," she whispered, fingers trembling as they traced the blood that streaked down Elysia's temple. Elysia lifted a weary hand, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. She looked at the townsfolk, miners carrying the wounded, women comforting crying children, deputies rounding up the remaining bandits. In that moment, Elysia realized that this battle was far from over. She knelt beside Finn, who lay motionless, ruined by her hammer. "This can't be the end," she murmured, her voice raw. "If I break him completely, his men'll scatter and find another leader. I need him alive." Hannah met her gaze, sorrow mixed with resolve. "Then keep him breathing." Elysia nodded and turned Finn's head gently, checking for signs of life. His chest rose and fell in a ragged rhythm. She exhaled, pressing her hand to his brow, feeling the faint warmth of blood. Behind her, Mercy's Crossing erupted into a chorus of relief and sorrow. Lanterns were lit, torches raised, and the townsfolk began the grim work of tending to their own. But Elysia, even as she knelt over her fallen adversary, sensed a deeper darkness stirring, something that lingered beyond the next hill, waiting to strike when least expected. Finn McCadden would live, but his fury would outlast the sunset. And as Elysia rose, supporting herself on the cuff of her sleeve, she realized this was but the opening salvo of a war that would test her resolve, her belief in unity, and the very steel of her spirit. Elysia Thorne stood at the threshold of her forge as dawn's first light spilled across Mercy's Crossing, painting the battered town in hues of rose and amber. The events of last night weighed on her mind like an anvil strapped to her chest. The echo of her hammer's final blow against Finn McCadden's revolver arm still rang in her ears. She knelt beside the wounded and the fallen, her fingertips tracing the damp, warm blood along her temple where she'd been grazed by debris. The sun remained captive behind distant clouds, as though the world itself paused to mourn the brutality that had unfolded under its watch. The townspeople moved silently, their faces etched with grief, relief, and uncertainty. Deputies maintained A guarded perimeter around the forge, eyes scanning every shadow. Beyond the barricades, the hills stretched vast and silent, concealing the remnants of McCadden's scattered bandits. Some had fled, nursing wounds with whatever aid they could. Muster. Others lay hidden, awaiting a chance to strike back once more. Elysia's throat constricted with the knowledge that peace was a fragile illusion, likely to shatter the moment her guard slipped. Hannah Walters materialized at Elysia's side, her eyes brimming with both worry and determination. She held a bundle of blankets and bandages, the first of many she would distribute. She knelt beside Elysia, placing a gentle hand on her friend's arm. "You should rest," Hannah whispered. "You fought like a tempest last night. Let me stitch that wound on your temple and bind it properly." Elysia shook her head, her attention fixed on the form of Finn McCadden, now unconscious on the dirt in front of the forge. "His life is not mine to end," she murmured. "If he dies, his men will scatter and a new chieftain will rise, someone even more ruthless. Besides, slaves to vengeance always breed more bloodshed." Hannah's lips trembled, torn between admiration and sorrow. "I respect that, but your own life matters. One misstep, and they might return, more prepared and more vengeful. You need time to recover." Elysia allowed Hannah to wrap her wound, her skin hypersensitive to every touch. The stinging antiseptic was a sharp reminder of her mortality, yet she fought the urge to step away. "I'll rest once I'm certain Mercy's crossing is secure." Hannah sighed, her gaze drifting to the grim scene. "The town has rallied, but we're still raw. People are wary to leave their homes, and trust is fragile. As long as Finn lives, that threat lingers. If word spreads that he was incapacitated, maybe merchants will come back. Maybe we can rebuild." Elysia punched her fist into her palm, the memory of hammer meeting flesh resonating in her bones. "I need to ensure Finn is held somewhere he cannot escape, and not just for Mercy's Crossing, but for every town he's terrorized. We need to turn him into a symbol of consequence rather than legend." Hannah nodded, stroking Elysia's hand. "I'll prepare supplies, but at least let me get you some food you haven't eaten." Elysia closed her eyes and let Hannah guide her to the saloon, where a group of townsfolk had gathered to prepare simple meals, stews, coffee, hardtack. As she ate, she allowed herself to feel the exhaustion she had been pushing aside. Each bite tasted of soot and tears, seasoned by anxiety. By mid-morning, the decision had been made. Finn McCadden would be taken to Sparrow's Gulch, a town fortified by steep cliffs and patrolled by an experienced sheriff known for his incorruptibility. There, Finn would be held in the jailhouse, if Sparrow's Gulch agreed to house him and guarantee his security. If he managed to escape, no doubt he would attempt to resurrect his gang and spread terror anew. A council convened in the town square, where Sheriff McAllister stood on a makeshift platform fashioned from stacked crates, his gaze sweeping the gathered crowd. Deputy sheriffs, miners, shopkeepers, and several farmers clutching pitchforks and rifles for defense. There was an unspoken tension, an awareness that this moment would define Mercy's Crossing's future. Elysia stood beside McAllister, her posture unwavering. She addressed the assembly in a steady, resolute voice. "Finn McCadden, wounded and capturable, lies at the forge. We cannot afford to let him languish here, where his legend might feed more violence. I propose that we escort him to Sparrow's Gulch, where Sheriff Turner has agreed to detain him. With Finn secured, we will have taken the first step toward rebuilding peace in our region. However, we need volunteers for the escort, and we must send word to Sparrow's Gulch at once to confirm arrangements." A murmur passed through the crowd. Some faces displayed relief at the prospect of a definitive solution, while others glowed with lingering fear. Sheriff McAllister signaled for silence. "Elysia speaks wisely," he intoned. "I will send a rider to Sparrow's Gulch immediately. In the meantime, we need a guard to accompany Alicia and the deputies to ensure Finn remains in custody. Any volunteers?" A sturdy miner named Jasper Holt stepped forward, nodding grimly. "I'll ride with you. If it's out there in the hills, I know the way, born and raised near these parts." Another voice, low and determined, joined the chorus. "I'll go," said Mora Finch, clutching a rifle in her hands. "If this is to be our town's fresh start, I won't sit idle watching." Alicia acknowledged their resolve with a slight nod, feeling gratitude mingle with the weight of her purpose. She exchanged a glance with Hannah, who was shaking her head gently. Though she longed to escort Finn herself, she recognized that Alicia's skill was too vital on the battlefield to risk at an early stage. In the courtyard behind the jailhouse, a rider named Samuel Cole tightened the straps of his saddle as Alicia approached. He offered a curt nod. Sparrow's Gulch was a 2-day ride south, navigating treacherous ridges and narrow canyons. Alicia realized that if Finn's escort were delayed, the risk of another bandit ambush increased by the hour. Samuel Cole, the rider, gave a bark of approval. "Sheriff Turner will meet us tomorrow at dusk near Half Moon Pass, outside Sparrow's Gulch. If he deems Finn unfit for immediate incarceration, we will have to hold him until dawn, when the makeshift prison opens." Alicia clenched her jaw. "Understood. Let's depart at first light." Dawn's pale veil barely cut through the morning mist as Alicia, Jasper Holt and Mora Finch prepared Finn's transport in front of the forge. Deputies had constructed a makeshift litter from sturdy planks, padded with blankets to keep him immobilized. Despite his injuries, Finn's battered sneer remained as toothless as his spirit. He glared at Alicia through swollen eyes as she approached. Her hammer now strapped to her saddle, its iron head still bearing the faint dents of battle. "Thorn!" he spat through cracked lips. "You think your victory means anything? I'll be back. My army will rise again. You'll see." Alicia met his eyes with an unwavering gaze. "We'll see. You'll answer for every life you took, but not here, somewhere you cannot influence or incite your men." A sudden wind carried a flurry of dust across the street, and Alicia felt as though the fabric of her argument had been draped over a grave. She turned away to conceal the ache in her chest, focusing on securing Finn to the litter. Jasper trotted his horse at a steady pace, the litter balanced between two riders. Mora mounted behind Alicia, scanning the hills for any sign of trouble. As they rode out of Mercy's Crossing, the once familiar contours of the town blurred behind them, an emblem of both refuge and ruin. The journey to Half Moon Pass unfolded across brutal landscapes, arid plains where jackrabbits darted between tufts of sagebrush, steep gorges where the river roared like a wounded beast, and ridges slick with loose shale. Each sunset inched them closer to Sparrow's Gulch, but also deeper into territory where McCadden's men might lurk. On the second day, as the sun dipped below a ridge of jagged rocks, Alicia and her small escort reached a narrow canyon where the walls pressed tight enough to trap sound. Around them, silence fell like a shroud. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the stillness. "It's too quiet," Mora whispered, her grip tightening around her rifle. "This doesn't feel right." Jasper nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They wouldn't pick the wide valley. If they wanted to ambush us, narrowing the path gives them the advantage." Alicia's pulse quickened. She dismounted, her boots stirring dust on the canyon floor. She crouched behind a boulder at the canyon's mouth, wiping sweat from her brow even as the air cooled. Her senses sharpened, attuned to every flicker of movement. A scuttling lizard, the faint rustle of a distanced breeze, the soft creak of leather against saddle. Mora and Jasper dismounted as well, anchoring the litter's legs into the ground. Elysia motioned for silence, her eyes narrowing. As she peered into the canyon's narrowing corridor, she detected silhouettes at a distance, faint shapes that melted into the dimming light. Bandits moving in pairs, each armed with rifles, their figures arranged in an L-shaped ambush formation. "They know we're coming," Elysia murmured, her breath shallow. "They set this trap." Mora's jaw tightened. "They'll pin us down in here and pick us off." "What do we do?" Fen asked, come forward until his body nearly braced against the rough stone. "We can't move Finn through that kill box. We need to draw them out. I'll take point. Jasper, suppress them when I signal. Mora, take position on that ledge to our right. You have a clear view of the entire canyon floor." Mora nodded, her face pale but unwavering. She hoisted her rifle, stepping onto a narrow ledge that gave her a vantage over the narrow passage. "I see them all. If they shift, I'll take the shot." Elysia unslung her rifle, breathing deliberately to steady her hand. She had never navigated an ambush this close to home. Her heart pounded, reminding her of the first time she had faced down Jeb and Craw in her forge. Despite her skill, despite her triumph, the terror of that moment had not left her. It had nested in her mind like a seed of doubt. "On my mark," she whispered, studying the dark shapes meandering within the canyon. "1, 2, 3, go!" She stood and unleashed a sharp shot, the rifle's report echoing like thunder against stone. A bandit's chest blossomed with a crimson bloom as he collapsed. Immediately a volley of bullets spat from the shadows, ripping into the ground around Jasper. He ducked behind a protruding boulder, his own rifle blazing in response. The crack of Mora's rifle punctuated the chaos. A bandit's horse reared and fell, throwing its rider into the dust. Elysia fired again, sending a second man sprawling. At her feet, but far more remained hidden in the darkness, their numbers still biting at the edges of her resolve. Jasper's voice crackled above the din. "They're moving up the left side. If we don't break their formation, we're sit ducks." Elysia flicked her gaze to the right, where Mora crouched atop the ledge, her rifle at the ready. In the dim light, it was impossible to distinguish friend from foe until the moment a muzzle flash painted a silhouette. She crept forward, rifle raised, toward a narrow offshoot path that cut into the rock wall. If she could flank the bandits, even a small advantage would tilt the fight in their favor. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she slipped into the shadowed crevice, every muscle taut. Through the gloom, she saw two figures, bandits who had shifted from their original positions, searching for any sign of movement. Elysia pressed her back against the stone, heart racing, aware that the slightest scuff would betray her presence. With calculated precision, she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The first bandit's head snapped back, his body collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. The second whirled, his eyes wide in disbelief, but Elysia's second shot found its throat, and he dropped with a gurgled moan. The canyon erupted in frenzy. Bandits cried out, rifles discharged, and the smell of gunpowder smothered the damp, earthy scent of the rock walls. Elysia's legs trembled as she navigated back to the canyon's mouth, gauging the changing positions. The ambush had been partially foiled, but some bandits still remained unaccounted for, likely to pour bullets into them if they tried to cross the canyon floor. Elysia exchanged a quick glance with Jasper, who had crawled up beside her. "We've got to lure them out into the open. Can you hold off?" He nodded, his face pale beneath a smear of dust and sweat. "Keep moving forward, I'll keep them pinned." She exhaled and sprinted across the canyon floor, bullets ricocheting around her. Each step was a gamble, hitting a rock face instead of a man, the slightest pause spelling death. She kept low, her boots barely making a sound on the gravel. Mora's rifle barked from above, dropping a bandit who tried to flank Jasper. Elysia seized the moment. She darted behind the next boulder, peeking out just long enough to place a bullet in a bandit's shoulder. The final two bandits, realizing they were losing the advantage, attempted to retreat up the narrow path. Elysia broke from her cover, sprinting after them. Her hammer, strapped to her back, clanged as she moved, reminding her of the many fights she had fought with iron alone. She cornered them near a rockfall, improvised rifles gripped in their hands. The taller of the two leveled his rifle at her. Elysia froze, her breathing ragged. Then she lunged, ducking beneath the barrel, and delivered a spinning hammer blow to his jaw. His skull crackled with the impact, and he crumpled into the dust. The second bandit fired, grazing Elysia's arm. White-hot pain shot through her nerves. She cried out, dropping to one knee, clutching her side. But the rage of survival surged through her, rendering pain into fuel. With her left hand, she snatched the bandit's rifle and used it to push him away as she rose. She leveled the rifle and pulled the trigger, sending him to his knees with a bullet to the chest. Elysia fell against a rock, the world weaving around her. Her vision swam with red-hot flashes and the echo of the barrel's shock. She sank to the ground, her palms pressed against the blood seeping through her fingers. The canyon floor felt jagged and coarse against her skin, but the dust smelled like triumph, and yet it was stained with loss. Jasper and Mora raced down to her side. Jasper knelt beside her, his eyes wide. "Elysia, you're badly hurt." Mora propped Elysia's head on her lap, tears glinting in her eyes. "Stay with us, we're almost clear. 2 more ridges, and then Sparrow's Gulch is within reach." Elysia blinked, her vision focusing on Mora's face, just as the first plume of smoke rose from the canyon's distant entrance. She felt the vibration of hooves and the murmur of voices behind the bandits' lines. Despite her wound, she knew more men were on their way. This ambush was merely the beginning of Finn's wrath unleashed. "Don't let Finn's men stop us," she rasped, her voice strained. "Carry on to Sparrow's Gulch." Jasper lifted her with surprising strength and draped her across his horse's saddle. Mora climbed behind him, her rifle ready. Together, they spurred the horse forward, each moment risking another volley of bullets. The flames of the setting sun draped the canyon walls in flickering crimson as they burst from the narrow corridor. Elysia grit her teeth, the pain in her side like a molten brand. Her fingers brushed the grip of her rifle, willing the pain away. She felt the ground beneath her feet as she dismounted again, this time propping herself against a boulder just outside the canyon mouth. "They're regrouping," Jasper murmured, scanning the ridges above. "Another 30 men, maybe more, but they're slower now. The ambush took tolls." Elysia forced herself upright. She steadied her breathing and let the contours of Sparrow's Gulch unfold before her. A cluster of sturdily built homes perched on rocky terraces, its jailhouse faintly visible on a raised plateau to the south. A barred gate guarded its entrance, with a lone guard pacing the walls under a flickering lantern. "We make a break for it," Elysia said, her voice low but unwavering. "If we can reach Sheriff Turner, he'll secure Finn and send a squad after. These men, that should buy us enough time to find safe passage." Mora nodded, supporting Elysia's weight as they moved in the dwindling light. The guard at the gate spotted them and let loose a shout, drawing a shotgun from its rack. "Sheriff Turner," Mora shouted. "We have Finn McCadden. We're hurt and need sanctuary." Within moments, the gate swung open and 2 deputies emerged, rifles trained on the approaching group. They ushered Elysia and her companions inside, guiding them to the small infirmary adjacent to the jailhouse. Sheriff Turner, a tall man with a stern jaw and salt-grey hair, greeted them with a brisk nod. "I heard about the ambush. You did well to reach me," he said, helping Elysia to a cot. "Leave Finn outside. I'll put him in the cell and notify my men." Jasper and Mora laid Finn on the cold stone floor of the cell. He remained unconscious, his face a mask of agony. As Sheriff Turner locked the iron bars, he took in Finn's battered form with unflinching eyes. "So this is the man who has terrorized off the territories," he murmured. Elysia lay on the cot, sweat-drenched and breathing shallowly. Hannah's arrival at Sparrow's Gulch soon followed, tears in her eyes as she knelt beside her friend. Alicia's head throbbed, and her side burned with a ferocity she had never known. Yet even in this moment of vulnerability, her mind was already strategizing. Word of Finn's capture had to be spread across the region. Blackrock, Eastfall, Redstone, towns that had shrunk in terror at the mere mention of his name. They needed hope, and they needed evidence that tyranny could be broken. Sheriff Turner stepped into the infirmary, flipping through pages of a ledger. Alicia Thorne, you and your people have earned Sparrow's Gulch's gratitude. But these wounds, we need to stop that bleeding. Before he could finish, a yell came from the courtyard, one of Turner's deputies, rifle in hand, calling attention to the rising smoke on a distant ridge. Alicia's eyes snapped open, a fierce light igniting in her pupils. Despite the pain, she struggled to sit up. "Tell him to hold on," she whispered to Hannah, voice laced with steel. "If it's the bandits regrouping, we'll stop them here. We cannot let Finn's men threaten another town." Sheriff Turner's jaw tightened. He strode to the cot and knelt, placing a hand on Alicia's shoulder. "No, Thorne. You're hurt beyond measure. You need to rest. I'm sending a squad up to scout. Wait here." She shook her head, her hand slipping from his grip. "I wish I could trust that they will stop at nothing. Let them come. We will hold our ground." Before he could argue further, the infirmary doors burst open, a deputy weighed down by a messenger's. Saddlebag entered, his face ashen. "Sheriff Turner," he gasped, drawing a battered letter from the bag. He handed it to Turner, whose eyes flicked across the page. His face turned pale, and he looked at Alicia as though she had spoken a different language. "This is from Mercy's Crossing," he murmured, the words catching in his throat. "They say the bandits never retreated. They feigned flight and circled. Around, they attacked the town's western perimeter, slaughtering everyone who stayed behind. They burned the marketplace and abducted young men from every household to rebuild their ranks. Mercy's Crossing is in ruins." Alicia's heart clenched, her world tilting on its axis. The pain in her side seemed to flare into a white-hot blaze. "No! That cannot be!" Hannah's hand flew to Alicia's shoulder, her eyes wide with anguish. "We have to go back. We must help them." Turner folded the letter, his face a mask of grim understanding. "We'll mobilize the men, but the pass is narrow, and the bandits hold every vantage point. We will need a strategy, and we need it now. Thorne, if you can stand, we ride at sunset. Your people need you. Mercy's Crossing needs you." Alicia closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks from the pressure of sunlight and sorrow. Every breath was a triumph against the pain, but her resolve did not waver. In that moment she realized that the forge would not stand without its blacksmith. The town would not survive without its champion. She drew a shuddering breath and swung, her legs over the side of the cot. Pain lanced down her side, but she forced herself to stand, gripping the wooden frame for support. Each step toward the infirmary's door was a testament to her willpower. As she stepped into the courtyard, a hush fell over the assembled deputies and townsfolk. Their faces held awe, respect, and fear. Fear that those bandits had struck not just at Mercy's Crossing, but at her very spirit. Sheriff Turner clapped her shoulder. "You lead us, Thorne, and we will stand with you. Together, we will reclaim Mercy's Crossing." Alicia's jaw tightened as she looked to the western ridge, where distant smoke still curled against the sky. The horizon felt nothing more than a blurred memory of home. She raised her head, letting the wind catch her hair, and offered a single nod, an unspoken vow. "We ride at sunset," she declared. "We will gather reinforcements along the way, but we will not hesitate. Finn's men will learn that their darkness cannot stand against our light. Mercy's Crossing awaits us, and we will free them. Whoever stands in our way will face the hammer." Her words, carried on the wind, reached Mercy's Crossing across. A chasm of smoke and sorrow. And as the town's ruin glimmered in the distance, Elysia Thorne felt a fire ignite within her chest. A fire that would not be quenched until Mercy's Crossing was restored, no matter the cost. Elysia's vision narrowed. A single thought pulsed through her mind. She could not let him blow them all to hell. She sprinted forward, ignoring every shard of pain arcing through her side, and flung herself at Finn. The grenade clattered on. The ground beside her. With a roar, she swept her rifle barrel across his wrist, smashing the pin clean off. The device tumbled into the dirt. She snatched at it with her free hand and hurled it toward the raging river. Without pause, she turned and struck Finn's shoulder with a hammer blow, so fierce it sent him sprawling. Behind her, the grenade exploded against the riverbank, a thunderous shockwave flinging earth and water into the air. Elysia staggered, her knees trembling, as debris peppered her like hail. She scrambled back, keeping her eyes on Finn, now twitching in the dirt, blood streaming from his new wound. The townspeople, emboldened by Elysia's valor, surged from their hiding places. A tide of armed farmers and deputies rushed forward, surrounding Finn's voice of rebellion with chains and shackles. But Elysia had no time to savor the moment. As she surveyed the newfound hope in the townspeople's eyes, another thunder of hoofbeats reverberated from the ridges above. Dozens of bandits, their crossbows and rifles aimed with deadly precision, emerged from concealed ledges. "Retreat!" Elysia's shout cracked across the battlefield. A volley of arrows whistled overhead. A bolt tore through a deputy's shoulder. Another volley punctured the sky like falling daggers. Before she could react, a tall figure emerged among the bandits, an imposing woman with a crooked blade across her hip and hardened eyes that shone like obsidian. Her presence commanded authority, and her gaze locked onto Elysia with the cold focus of a predator. "You must be the blacksmith," the woman said, her voice smooth as steel. "Finn McCadden spoke of you. He believed you were the key to controlling Mercy's Crossing." Elysia squared her shoulders, ignoring the pain that blossomed in her side. "He's wrong. I'm here to end this." The woman's lips curled into a savage smile. "Brave, but foolish. My name is Marisol de Luca, the new chiefess of Finn's remaining legion. I'm here to claim what's his by right." Hannah fired an arrow at Marisol, grazing her shoulder. Marisol hissed, but she didn't flinch. "You should have stayed home, teacher." Without hesitation, Marisol drew her blade and leapt down from the ridge. She landed in a crouch, fluid and lethal. Elysia raised her rifle, but the bandits had too many escape routes. They would overwhelm the townspeople if allowed. Elysia ducked beneath Marisol's first sweep, feeling the whoosh of air as the blade missed her by inches. She fired, but the shot flew wide as Marisol danced back, her feet swift and precise, where each movement was poetry forged in blood. Elysia reversed her rifle into a club, connecting with Marisol's forearm in a pained crack. Stones scattered underfoot as Marisol grunted, raising her second blade to slash at Elysia's ribs. Elysia twisted, her linen shirt ripping as the blade cut. Pain erupted along her side, steel lancing through her nerves. She whirled and slammed, her hammer into Marisol's elbow. The sound was as brutal as the moment of impact. The blade flew from Marisol's grasp, and she writhed in the dirt, fist pressed to the wound. Marisol snarled, rolling to her feet like a panther recovering from a strike. "You will bleed for what you did. Taking Finn from me is treason." Elysia clenched her injured side, each breath ragged. She struggled to stand, hugging the pain like a bitter friend. Treason? He murdered his people. He slaughtered innocent lives. My town. He deserved to face justice. Marisol's face twisted with anguish. "You know nothing of justice. We are survivors. We rose from the ashes of our pain. Finn was our leader because he gave us purpose. He gave us unity." Elysia's jaw clenched. Your unity is based on fear and violence. My people stand by choice, not forced allegiance. This ends now." She launched herself forward, opening with a vicious hammer strike that caught Marisol across the chest. The force sent her crashing into a heap of rubble. Alicia followed, wheezing with pain, as she kept her hammer cocked overhead. The townsfolk and sparrows, Gulch deputies, surged forward as one, bayonets and rifles at the ready. They encircled Marisol's remaining forces, nudging them into submission. One by one, bandits raised their hands, their eyes flicking between Marisol's battered form and Alicia's resolute face. Marisol, blood seeping from her chest wound, stared up at Alicia with a glimmer of respect. She gripped the earth, raising herself enough to lock eyes with Alicia. "You fight with heart, Blacksmith," she rasped, voice laced with pain and irony. "Justice is not always blind, but sometimes it must be tempered with mercy." Alicia's breathing stopped briefly at the admission, an echo of the forging bellows she had once used to mold iron. She withdrew her hammer from Marisol's ribs and allowed the sheriff's deputies to seize the new chiefess. The morning sun had broken the horizon by the time Mercy's Crossing's south end was secured. The eclipse of violence gave way to a fragile calm. Bandit captives marched in chains, their heads bowed. The survivors, mostly children, women, and the elderly, emerged from their hiding spots near the river, blinking in the sunlight. Alicia watched them gather around the water's edge. Their eyes, haunted by loss, began to kindle with hope as they realized they were free. Mothers found their children by the banks, brothers embraced sisters, and farmers surveyed the soil, as though weighing the possibility of reclaiming their ruined fields. Hannah knelt beside Alicia, brushing dust from her hair. "We did it. Hearts unite, not reign by fear. Mercy's Crossing will live again." Alicia pressed a hand to her side, where pain flared like molten embers. Yet she felt a cold determination settle over her. The forge must rise from these ashes, stronger than ever. But for now, the sight of her people, free and unbroken, was the only victory she needed. As the townspeople gathered around the forged barricades, Alicia stepped forward on a small platform assembled from broken crates. Her voice quivered with emotion. "Mercy's Crossing stands because of every one of you. We have faced fire and blood, and we have not faltered. We rebuild not just for ourselves, but for the promise that fear will never rule these lands again. Our wheel is turning and our hammer rings. Let it be heard throughout every valley, every ridge. We are not defined by ruin, but by how we rise." A cheer rose, shaky but resolute, echoing across the valley where the distant silhouette of sparrows. Gulch watched in solidarity. The tide had turned, but Mercy's Crossing's scars would remain. Healing would come slowly. Trust must be regained in every battered soul. But as Alicia looked upon her town, mountains of ash and charred timbers, a single conviction burned within her chest. The forge, though reduced to rubble, would breathe fire again. And with every hammer's strike, the spirit of Mercy's Crossing would beat stronger, echoing across the plains, an unwavering testament to resilience. Deal. The sun had barely crested the jagged peaks to the east when Alicia Thorne surveyed the battered remains of Mercy's Crossing from the newly erected wooden platform that served as the town's heart. Her gaze swept across the smouldering timbers, where the timber-clad facades once lined the main street in orderly rows, now charred remains dotted with embers still glowing in deep fissures. The early morning air carried a haze of acrid smoke, and each breath Alicia took carried the scent of ruin. She could see small clusters of survivors huddled around makeshift fires, tearing away debris to salvage what they might. Behind Alicia, the Sparrow's Gulch deputies stood in a tight formation, rifles slung over shoulders, while the townsfolk, men, women, and even children, moved with newfound resolve. They had seen the worst that Finn McAdam's forces could unleash: destruction, abduction, and unrelenting brutality. And now, after their triumphant but costly victory over Marisol de Luca and the remaining bandits, they faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from ash and sorrow. Alicia's gaze settled on the forge's ruins, where twisted iron beams jutted skyward like broken bones. The forge's hearth lay in shattered stone, components scattered, the bellows charred beyond repair. In her hand she held a length of steel, a flattened horseshoe that remained from her first forge years ago, the imprint of its original shape, still faintly visible. It felt like the last tether to her past life, a relic she would carry with her until she could rebuild her sanctuary. The platform's boards creaked beneath her boots as she climbed down to walk among her people. She moved with steady deliberation, each step reminding her of the sharp pain at her side, where the wound inflicted by Marisol's blade still marked her body with a dull ache. Even as she ignored it, it tugged at her consciousness, reminding her of her mortality and the high stakes of their fragile peace. "We begin clearing the rubble," she addressed the assembled survivors. Her voice was firm, yet compassionate, each syllable carrying the weight of her own pain and determination. "Salvage what you can, set aside lumber and iron. We have to rebuild, and fast. Our neighbors heard of what happened here, and some will offer aid. We need to send envoys for supplies and skilled hands to help us. I will travel to Blackrock and Eastfall next week. We won't wait for help to come, we'll go after it. Mercy's Crossing will be a place of industry once more, but we must stand united. Each of you, find someone to work with. Use the space in the schoolhouse to shelter your families. The saloon's back rooms can be temporary quarters. We'll feed the hungry, heal the wounded, and forge new tools from the iron we salvage. We rise from this together, or we do not rise at all." A low murmur rippled through the crowd, rising into a chorus of tentative agreement and subdued cheers. The spark of hope had ignited amidst the ruins, but Alicia knew that embers would not rebuild a town. They needed sweat, blood, and unity. From the edge of the gathering, Hannah Walters approached, holding a bundle of bandages and antique tools she had scavenged from the infirmary. She had insisted on assisting the healers through the night, stitching wounds and comforting the bereaved. Her once pale face was now smudged with soot and streaked with tears. "How are you feeling?" Hannah asked, her soft voice carrying concern as she knelt beside Alicia and offered a linen cloth moistened with herbal poultice. Alicia met her gaze, eyes flickering with both gratitude and burden. "It still aches, but I can bear it. We have work to do." Hannah pressed the poultice gently to Alicia's side, and the blacksmith winced. "Promise me you'll rest soon. You can't lead with one eye on your knife wound forever." Alicia nodded, mustering a small but sincere smile. "I promise, but for now I have to see this town rise." As Hannah helped Alicia wrap her wound, the newcomers arrived from Sparrow's Gulch, groups of carpenters, blacksmiths, and masons volunteering their expertise. They carried sacks of nails, bundles of fresh timber, coils of rope, and sturdy hammers. Alicia recognized a few faces, other blacksmiths she had known by reputation, men and women whose forges had been swallowed by the encroaching darkness of bandit rule. One older blacksmith, a grizzled man named Thomas Whitaker, approached with a broad grin beneath his ash-streaked face. His leather apron bore patches where his forge's name had once been stamped in brass. "Thorn," he called out, grasping her forearm. "I heard you needed help. My forge is gone, just like yours. I'll lend you my hands and my fire. Between us, we'll get the bellows going by month's end." Alicia clasped his calloused hand, her grip strong despite the lingering pain. "Thank you, Thomas. With your help, we'll reclaim our town." Thomas offered a nod and turned to address a group of apprentices and journeymen, Unload those shovels and crowbars. We'll break enough ground to lay a fresh foundation. Nearby, Mora Finch had gathered a group of farmers and ranchers. They were sifting through a pallet of iron rods and bent nails they had scavenged during the final assault on Mercy's Crossing. She called out, "We'll need to test the soil before rebuilding homes. If it's too unstable, we'll have to drive stakes or lay stone footings. Get the pickaxes ready." Hannah drew Alicia aside. "Your presence keeps everyone moving. If you rest, this will slow." Alicia placed a hand on Hannah's shoulder. "I know. But if Finch rallies the farmers and Whitaker occupies the blacksmiths, I can lead the strategy, send out scouts, distribute supplies, coordinate with Sparrow's Gulch. You, Hannah, keep the infirmary running and train anyone who can help. We'll rotate duties so no one burns out." Hannah nodded, her eyes reflecting fierce loyalty. "I'll gather women to bandage the wounded and set up a rotation for the infirmary. No one will be left behind." Behind them, Deputy Carson approached with a group of Sparrow's Gulch journeymen carpenters. They carried a stack of rough-cut boards and a crate of salvaged railroad spikes. "We'll set up a workshop by the river, Elysia. Get water pounding, and we'll forge beams and plates for the new structures." Elysia glanced to the river. Its current now calmer under the morning sun, reflective and cold. And it would power the bellows for the new forge and drive a water wheel for a grain mill reconstruction. "Make it so. I'll get Whitaker to lay out a smelting floor. We can use the old mill's iron parts for the bellows mechanism." As the day progressed, Mercy's Crossing transformed from a grave filled with memories into a pulsing center of renewed ambition. Shovels struck earth, nails rang against girders, hammers chipped stone. Each sound echoed like a heartbeat, fragile but persistent. By late afternoon, Elysia found herself at the river's edge, watching as Whitaker and the Sparrow's Gulch blacksmiths forged long iron bars beneath the open sky, the smell of smouldering charcoal mixing with the crisp scent of new, hopeful beginnings. Thomas Whitaker, sweat-drenched but smiling, shouted directions to his apprentices. "Keep the coals hot, temper them in the river. We need beam supports by nightfall." Elysia studied the workers, each face a collage of dirt, determination, and fleeting smiles. She knelt by the water, dipping her calloused fingers into its cold flow, letting it wash away some of the grime and emotional weight she carried. The chill traveled up her arm to the wound at her side, eliciting a sharp ache that she bit back, without complaint. She had known pain all her life, ever since the first time she learned her father's hammer was more than a tool. It was a weapon, a way of survival. A gentle rustling behind her indicated Hannah's return. She carried a stack of wooden crates filled with cigarettes and small bits of tobacco, luxuries that the townsfolk treasured now more than ever. She sat beside Elysia, offering one of the cigarettes. "You earned it," she said softly. Elysia accepted. Her eyes drifting to the smoke curling into the afternoon air. "Do you ever think we'll see Mercy's Crossing like before?" she asked, exhaling a thin line of smoke. Hannah wiped her hand across her brow, her expression both weary and hopeful. "I believe so. Homes, a functioning school again, the saloon raucous with laughter instead of gunfire. It will take time, but the people here, thieves, blacksmiths, farmers, are all dedicated to rebuilding. We'll patch wounds that go deeper than just broken bones." Elysia nodded and gazed toward the forge site. "Once Whitaker's team has the smelting floor down, we can begin forging tools. We need axes, saw blades, and more horseshoes. We'll also need to salvage the old train tracks to send messages to neighboring towns and get supplies in." Hannah's brow furrowed as she flicked ash from her cigarette. "I worry about Marisol de Luca. She was defeated but not captured. If she regains her strength, she'll rally her loyalists, those who escaped into the hills. She'll unite them and return with vengeance." Elysia exhaled slowly, thinking of the scars that still throbbed along her side from Marisol's final strike. I've been mulling over how to prevent that. We need more than a mere militia. Perhaps we should train cavalry and set up guard outposts in the surrounding hills, a permanent presence to deter bandits, and a sentinel to warn us of any approach. Elysia approached them, the wooden boards of the foundation creaking under her careful steps. She reached out to grasp the beam's rough-hewn edge. Though still damp with river water, the metal felt promising, solid, enduring, a promise of generations yet to come. Tomas wiped sweat from his brow and turned to Elysia. This will be the heaviest piece, but once it's in place we can build around it. We're mating it to a new forge box, so the fire stays contained and the heat rises through the chimney will rebuild on the same footprint as the old one. Elysia traced her finger across the beam, eyes narrowing. I want it angled toward the river. That way we can collapse the floor slightly, let water run beneath so we can quench iron directly without additional hauling. We'll need to plan the anvil's placement carefully, for efficiency. Tomas offered a slow, approving nod. Thought you'd like that. Good thinking. They spent the next hours mapping out the new forge, measuring distances with Elysia's leather-bound calipers. Every inch mattered, the distance from hearth to anvil, the chute to the quenching tank, the throttle for the bellows, the flue's height to draw smoke efficiently. Elysia's mind buzzed with images of horseshoes, plowshares, and fine steel blades that would emerge from this new hearth. As night settled, the first campfires flickered across the riverbank, casting warm light on the faces of tired but determined workers. Elysia, her side throbbed with dull pain, took a moment to sit on a nearby boulder. The town's noise, hammers, voices, and the river's constant murmur was a symphony of recovery. Hannah returned with a tray of steaming coffee and a loaf of freshly baked bread. She sat beside Elysia, offering her a portion. You've done more today than most do in a week. You should be resting. Elysia broke off a piece of bread, dipping it into her coffee. I feel more alive than I have in a long time. Every nail we drive, every iron bar we forge, every home we rebuild, I feel the pulse of something new. And I know that soon, even the hills around these valleys will feel that pulse, an echo of Mercy's Crossing's resilience. Hannah took a sip of her coffee, her eyes reflecting the dance of campfire flames. I've been reaching out to Blackrock and Eastfall, as you asked. They've agreed to send supplies, timber, tools, and food. We'll also have to organize wagon trains to bring everything over. They estimate at least 2 weeks before deliveries arrive, given the condition of passes. Elysia nodded, the wheels turning in her mind. That'll give us time to set up defenses. I want lookout posts on every ridge, a signal fire network so we can communicate quickly if Marisol or any remnants of McCadden's men come for us. We'll need food caches along the river also. Rapids are shallow in late spring, and we can use boats to carry supplies if we clear the river's channel. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Clearing the river? That's ambitious. Elysia smiled, her eyes bright despite the shadow of exhaustion. This town survived a massacre. Clearing a river becomes a small task when it's a lifeline. Plus, we'll need the water wheel to grind grain. We can't trust the old mills. They're either destroyed or controlled by Blackrock's prior regime. We'll establish our own supply chain. Beneath them, the forge's bellows buzzed as 2 blacksmiths hammered. Steel plates, shaping them for the chimney's flue. Sparks flew upward, disappearing into the night sky like tiny fireflies. A sudden shout from across the river drew Elysia's attention. She saw Jasper Holt waving from the opposite bank, his figure illuminated by a torch. He pounded a rock with his fist, then pointed toward the northern hills, where a single faint glow shimmered against the darkness. "We have company," Jasper called out, voice carrying across the water. I thought we cleared the scouts after that ambush, but I see movement. Figures, maybe 20. They're advancing slowly, keeping low. Elisia's jaw clenched as she rose to her feet, bread and coffee abandoned in their place. She pressed a hand to her side, ignoring the throbbing pain, and issued orders. Deputy Carson, gather the sharpshooters. Take position along that berm, just beyond the willow trees. Aim for their flanks. Mora and her riflemen secure the ridge lines. Make them think twice before they try a frontal assault. Hannah, get the rest of the townspeople behind barricades. Tom, you and Whitaker will have to keep forging. We'll need more weapons, aluminum tools, axe heads, bayonets. Use every scrap you saved from the old forge. Hannah knelt and kissed Elisia's arm gently. Be careful. Elisia offered a determined nod. I will. As the townsfolk mobilized, Elisia sprinted toward the embankment, her rifle ready. She scanned the hillside through the dusk, trying to count the dark silhouettes. She recognized faces among them. Some turned backward, perhaps scouting for replacements. Elisia felt her pulse surge. This was the moment when Mercy's Crossing's fate would once again be decided. The glint of flashlight reflectors flickered, like distant stars, solemn and foreboding. She took a deep breath, steadying her heart to the rhythm of impending battle. Hold your fire until I say so, she instructed, her voice carrying across the field. We want them to think we're still, weak. When they're within range, we'll strike like lightning. The men on the ridge nodded, steadying their rifles. The townspeople behind the higher barricades readied homemade shields, wood panels nailed to barrels, and sharpened pikes. Elisia dropped to one knee and watched the approaching bandits. Their ragtag force, perhaps 20 strong, emerged like ghosts from the foothills. They wore a mix of tattered uniforms and patched leather jackets, their faces masked by scarves. At their center stood a familiar figure, a young man, unshaven, clutching a rifle in one hand and a ragged banner in the other, a symbol of renewal for McCadden's fractured legacy. Elisia's heart sank as she recognized him. Finn's cousin, Griffin McCadden, whose eyes glowed with the same cold intensity as his uncle's had. Legend said that if the McCadden bloodline was the blade, Griffin's fury was the whetstone that honed it. Now he stood poised to reignite the flames of terror. Remember what's at stake, Elisia whispered. We protect our home, we protect our people. We end this cycle tonight. Her sharpshooters exchanged glances and erected makeshift supports to brace their rifles. The hush descended, a heavy blanket that smothered the field. Even the river's roar receded, as though silenced by the tension. Slowly, Griffin stepped forward a few paces out of the main group. He raised his rifle in a mocking salute. "Thorn!" he called out, voice carrying with the wind. "Your hammer is gone, your town is half in ruins, and now your allies from Sparrow's Gulch can't save you. We don't need Finn to terrorize you, just enough of his blood bears the same legacy." Elisia rose to her feet, rifle aimed coldly. "This ends tonight, Griffin. Mercy's Crossing will burn no more." Griffin's lips curled into a smile that barely concealed his contempt. "Then come get me," he signaled with a swift movement of his arm. Instantly, half of his men lunged forward, while the others fanned out to encircle Mercy's Crossing. "Now!" Elisia's shout cut through the twilight's hush like a blade. Her sharpshooters sprang into action, synchronized rifle fire cracking through the night air. Sparks erupted from metal crashing into metal as the bullets struck rifles and ammunition belts. The riverbank behind Elisia lit up as Tom and Whitaker lobbed torches onto piles of scrap wood, igniting bonfires that cast a fierce, flickering light. The glow revealed the full scale of Mercy's Crossing's defiance. Townspeople armed with every makeshift weapon they could find, cats, pitchforks, and even ladles from the saloon's kitchen. Griffin's men hesitated, their silhouettes thrown into sharp relief by the flames. Many gripped their weapons with white-knuckled terror, uncertain if they should advance or retreat. But Griffin laughed. a skeletal, hollow sound that cut through the crackling fire. "Fools!" he bellowed, stepping into the light. "Hold your ground! We'll carve this town out of your hearts and raise McCadden's banner once more." A volley of shots rang out as Elysia fired from her kneeling position. Her bullet caught a bandit's rifle stock, sending splinters flying. She lunged to her feet, her boots crunching on gravel, and sprinted toward the barricade. Hannah, at her side, released another arrow, its shaft striking a bandit's shoulder with a wet thud. Mora and Deputy Carson moved to flank Griffin's advancing foot soldiers. Their own rifles barked in unison, knocking scores of McCadden's men off balance. Screams and howls echoed as the bonfire's light danced across faces, warping them into masks of agony. Elysia reached the barrier and vaulted over it, rifle cocked. She fired again, catching a bandit who had raised a shot for some poor townsman. Each bullet carried vengeance, a reclamation of the lives lost, an assertion that Mercy's Crossing would no longer cower. But Griffin pressed on, advancing. Through the carnage as though the world bent to his command. His rifle barked like a rabid beast. With every shot, a man fell. At his side, tenacious survivors of Marisol's legion fought as though something sacred depended on their victory. Elysia's heart thundered in her chest as she reloaded. She raised her rifle and fired. Griffin's jacket, patched and worn, rifled through a bullet that severed the front of his bandolier, yet he staggered only momentarily before lunging at her with the butt of his rifle. "You're slow, Thorn," he snarled, swinging the butt downward. Sparks flew as the metal met metal, Griffin's rifle against Elysia's rifle in a savage collision. Elysia spun aside, and their weapons clacked together again, a duel of steel and wood. Through the cacophony, Elysia glimpsed Griffin's gaze, icy, unyielding. "So it ends with the next swing," Griffin whispered, his grip tightening on the rifle's butt. Elysia felt the adrenaline surge through her veins. She dropped the rifle and drew her hammer, the cool leather grip bringing clarity to her mind. Griffin spat, pulling a dagger from his belt. They circled one another, sparks of the flare-ups from the bonfires reflecting in their eyes. He leaped forward, blade aimed for her throat. Elysia twisted, her hammer's head smashing down onto the dagger's tip. The blade shuddered and bent, but did not shatter. Griffin's eyes flashed with bloodlust. He spun away, knife still lodged in the twisted metal, and charged. Elysia met him halfway, swinging her hammer overhead. Griffin braced with his makeshift rifle, forcing her eyes to focus on the arc of the strike. She shifted her weight, letting the hammer blow slide across the rifle's butt. With a roar, Griffin fired blindly, the muffled snap echoing off the surrounding buildings. The bullet whizzed past Elysia's ear, grazing her temple. Pain flared, but she remained unwavering. Hammer gripped like an extension of her arm. His next slash caught her shoulder, sending a wave of hot agony down her side. Elysia staggered, but forced herself to remain standing. She feigned left, then pivoted, driving the hammer's claw into Griffin's thigh. He released a strangled cry and dropped his dagger. But Griffin was quick. He yanked his rifle free, encrusted with fractals of iron from Elysia's hammer strike. He pulled the trigger, an empty click. The gun jammed. Elysia seized her chance. She swung the hammer in a sweeping arc, hammer's face aimed at the side of Griffin's head. The blow landed with resounding force, and Griffin crumpled like a marionette with its strings cut. Silence, the hush of uncertainty, settled over the battlefield. Elysia stood panting over Griffin's fallen form. The bonfire's glow cast long shadows across Mercy's Crossing's battered streets. She had faced countless adversaries with hammer and heart, but never an enemy whose blood's lineage seemed to define his destiny. She knelt beside him, hammer at the ready. "It doesn't have to end in blood," she said quietly, wrapping her glove around his wrist. "We needed to break the cycle of violence, not perpetuate it." Griffin's eyes fluttered open, pain and disbelief mingling into a raw expression of defeat. His face was smeared with dirt, his clothes torn, yet despite the agony something flickered, a flicker of recognition, of shame, of understanding. "Mercy's crossing," he whispered, voice raspy. I didn't want it this way." Alicia pressed, a gentle yet firm hand against his chest. "Then choose solidarity over fear. Lay down your weapons and you'll live. Help us rebuild, become part of something stronger than hatred." Griffin's breath shuddered. He tried to speak but could only manage a shuddered nod. Alicia waited, heart pounding, as he unclenched his fists and dropped his knuckles to the dirt. In that moment, a moment forged in pain and redemption, she saw the reflection of a better path in his haunted eyes. Behind them, townsfolk cautiously approached, wary but hopeful. Deputy Carson glared at Griffin, his rifle still trained on. The trembling man. But Alicia placed a hand on Carson's shoulder, raising her voice so that all could hear. "This is our chance to end the violence on both sides. If we show mercy, we break the cycle. If we spill more blood, we become the very monsters we sought to defeat. Mercy's Crossing needs a new legacy, one built on unity, not vengeance." Carson's grip loosened on his rifle. He studied Griffin, now shackled against a wooden post, as though searching for a crack in the wall of animosity that years of banditry and fear had built. Finally he lowered his rifle. A collective exhale rippled through the assembled townsfolk. And Sparrow's Gulch deputies. The tension that had coated the air dissipated, replaced by a fragile calm that felt like a balm to each soul present. From the river's edge to the charred timbers of the marketplace, Mercy's Crossing held its breath. Alicia's chest rose and fell with the rush of relief that surged through her, knowing that in choosing mercy, they claimed a victory that extended beyond any battlefield. Yet, as the sun dipped fully below the horizon, the shadow cast by the hills around them lengthened unnaturally. The warmth of the bonfires and the flicker of newfound hope did little to dispel the chill that settled across Mercy's Crossing. She turned her gaze back to Griffin, whose head drooped in exhaustion. Alicia recognized the mirroring of pain and fear in his face, the same she had once seen in Finn's. She realized the fragile thread upon which their shared destinies balanced. "We take care of you," she said quietly, standing. "We'll provide food, shelter, and a chance for a new life. But if you ever betray our trust, we will not hesitate to bring you down. Understand?" Griffin's head jerked upward, his gaze meeting hers. He rasped, "I understand." She released her grip and stepped back, giving him space. The townsfolk formed a rough circle around him, wary but attentive. Deputy Carson barked an order. "Move him to the old jailhouse until we decide what to do next. Then we start reconstruction tomorrow." The deputy's voice held a mixture of respect and lingering suspicion, an echo of the balancing act Alicia had orchestrated. As the deputies hobbled Griffin away, Alicia exhaled deeply, washing the moment over her. The battlefield's fog lifted, revealing Mercy's Crossing's battered silhouette. The forge's skeleton, iron beams jutting like ribs, loomed in the moonlight. She turned to Thomas Whitaker. "How soon can we get the forge operational?" Thomas wiped the sweat and soot from his brow, an appreciative smile forming as he studied the scene of triumph and resolve. "With the coup we have here, at least 6 days. We need to set the anvil's pedestal, finish the chimney's flue, and reroute the water trough beneath the anvil. Once that's in place, we'll have all the horseshoes and reinforcements we need." Alicia's lips curved upward, a glimmer of relief brightening her storm-weathered face. "Good. Then we start. Come dawn, watchtowers go up and scouts rotate. We'll need to be vigilant until every last bandit is driven from these lands." Thomas nodded and patted Alicia's shoulder. "You'll be the finest blacksmith known and respected across the territory." She exhaled, allowing herself a single moment of quiet gratitude before turning to the emerging glow of the forge's new fires. The sound of metal clashing, the hiss of quenching water, and the murmur of cooperation wove through the night air, and, above it all, Alicia looked to the hills that had once threatened her home. Though the embers of violence still smouldered beyond Mercy's Crossing's reclaimed borders, hope had taken root. The hammer's song, once a solitary echo in an empty valley, now rose in a chorus of unity, forging a new legacy from the shattered dreams and seared hearts. Indeed, dawn broke over Mercy's Crossing like a promise reborn. Tender ribbons of sunlight crept through the gaps between charred beams, igniting the haze of smoke that still clung to the valley's floor. Birds, previously absent in the days of ash and gunpowder, now soared above the burgeoning warmth of a town determined to rise. The crisp air carried the tang of hot steel and freshly turned earth, a symphony of scents that spoke of labor, hope, and the promise of renewal. At the center of this vibrant resurgence stood Elysia Thorne, her gaze steady as she surveyed the bustling scene before her. The new forge's bellows pumped rhythmically, each exhalation fanning the fire beneath a freshly laid anvil. Thomas Whitaker, dressed in a thick leather apron, guided an apprentice as they carefully calibrated the angle of the newly cast horseshoe forms. The river roared gently beneath the wooden retaining wall, its current now cleared of obstructions that had hindered boats for years. In the distance, watchtowers, nimble wooden platforms perched atop reinforced posts, dotting every ridge, served as silent sentinels. Each had a single deputy or volunteer sentinel posted high, their eyes trained on the surrounding hills and passes. If any sign of bandit activity stirred beyond the valley, Mercy's Crossing would know within moments. Elysia descended from the forge's platform to make her rounds. She passed by Mora Finch, who stood at the entrance of the general store, distributing sacks of flour to waiting families. The store's shelves, once barren, now groaned with provisions swapped from Blackrock and Eastfall's generous deliveries. Women, their faces streaked with soot yet alight with purpose, moved between barrels of grain, tins of salted pork, and coils of fresh rope. Nearby, Deputy Carson led a group of younger recruits through marksmanship practice, each of them kneeling. Behind stacks of salvage crates, rifles aimed at distant targets. The cartridge cases on the ground glinted like fallen petals, a testament to their discipline and determination. Elysia paused when she noticed a quiet commotion at the old jailhouse. Jensen, the senior deputy from Sparrow's Gulch, was methodically removing Griffin McCadden's shackles. Griffin, his once proud posture now stooped, stood barefoot on the dusty floor. His once black hair was matted with dirt and ash, and the maze of scars on his face spoke of battles past and choices yet uncertain. This moment, Griffin's liberation, carried the weight of Mercy's culmination. Mercy's Crossing had chosen to spare the young man who had raised the McCadden banner after his uncle's defeat. Their path had been fraught with violence, and it would have been easy to watch him rot in captivity. Instead, they chose redemption, believing that building a future required not only strength but compassion. Elysia watched as Griffin lifted a trembling hand to rub the scar on his cheek, the trace of pain still present. Jensen laid a firm hand on Griffin's shoulder. "You're free to go, but remember, your life is no longer your own alone. You bear the fate of every step you take from here." Griffin nodded, his eyes cast downward. He moved past Elysia without meeting her gaze, pausing only at the threshold of the forge's footprint, the symbolic heart of the town's resurgence. He lingered for a moment, staring at the anvil, then stepped into the open valley beyond. Elysia felt a pang of uncertainty. She had given word that any who sought reconciliation could find a place among them, provided they upheld the peace. Griffin's path ahead would be precarious. Suspicions would follow him like a shadow. But for now, the valley's hush held promise that violence, though always lurking at the edges, need not be the cornerstone of their future. Hannah found Elysia at that moment, her eyes scanning the open expanse as though weighing every possibility. "Do you think he'll survive out there?" Hannah asked, her voice quiet. Elysia closed her eyes as the wind carried soft sounds of rebuilding, hammers, saws, and voices harmonizing in a chorus of rebirth. "He has no choice but to find a new path," she replied. "If he truly wants redemption, Mercy's Crossing can offer him a chance to prove it. But the hills are treacherous, and rumors of McCadden loyalists still echo through the passes." Hannah nodded, understanding the delicate balance that held Mercy's Crossing's newfound peace. "Perhaps he'll carry word of our unity to others. Show them there's an alternative to banditry." Elysia opened her eyes, their resolve firming like steel forged in fire. "That, among many other things, would be a good start. And Jesus del Zoom, tune. As the morning shadows lengthened, Elysia led a small group at the helm of a wagon train heading eastward. Alongside her rode Thomas Whitaker, Hannah Walters, Deputy Carson, and Maura Finch, each chosen for their expertise and unwavering dedication. The wagons, laden with iron bars, tools, and general supplies, rolled along the riverbank road that wound between the hills. Their destination was Eastfall, a trading hub known for its artisans and merchants. Eastfall, once neutral ground, had been hesitant to support Mercy's Crossing in the aftermath of McCadden's wrath. But Elysia believed that if she could demonstrate the town's resilience, they could secure larger, more sustainable supplies. Fine steel, healthy livestock, and even additional manpower. The first miles trudged by under a canopy of oaks whose leaves fluttered like emerald embers in the breeze. The road curved beside the river, which now sparkled under midday sun. The water was clear as crystal, free of the obstructions that once threatened to turn it into a stagnant nightmare. They passed occasional farmsteads, families returning to salvaged fields, their horses ploughing over ash-stained earth, preparing for new crops. Children waved from rickety fences. Some ran alongside the wagons, curious about the travellers who carried the symbols of Mercy's Crossing's renewal. By mid-afternoon, the first ridge, known locally as Broken Elm Pass, rose ahead. Its rocky face bore scars from years of unauthorized logging. The ascent was steep, and Elysia anticipated potential bandit scouts. She ordered the wagons to halt, and they dismounted. Thomas and Carson inspected the path ahead, searching for signs of ambush. "No traps or footprints," Thomas reported, crouching beside a clump of spiked cactus. "But we won't know until we're halfway up." Elysia strapped on her rifle and assessed the horizon. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, carrying whispers about possible bandit activity. She glanced at Hannah and Maura, silent sentinels of support, then spurred her horse, leading them forward. They climbed in single file, the wagons slowly following under Maura's watchful eye, reins guided by the volunteers. Elysia's boots kicked up small rocks as she ascended, her eyes fixed on the path's twists. She could sense every change in the wind's rhythm, crosswinds that suggested narrow ledges above, the faint echo of footsteps that could be anything, from a stray goat to a hidden scout. Halfway up, they crested a sharp hairpin turn to find a small group of riders blocking the path, a band of McCadden loyalists, dressed in patched leathers bearing the faint remains of Finn's banner. Their eyes glowed with feral anticipation. At their front stood a woman with steel-grey hair braided tightly down her back. Her face held the same steely gaze Elysia had seen in Marisol's eyes. This was Lucinda Moore, one of Marisol's lieutenants, a wraith-like figure who survived. The tempest of blood and vengeance. Elysia's pulse accelerated as she raised her voice across the narrow pass. Lucinda Moore, you're far from Mercy's Crossing. Release the wagons, or face the consequences. Lucinda's thin lips curled into a predator's smile. She drew a Colt revolver and pointed it at Elysia. Brave words, Blacksmith, but this passes ours by right of conquest. We'll remove you and your wagon train, and then no one will ever speak of Mercy's Crossing again. Elysia's heart steadied into a hammer's beat, steady, resolute. You'll have to take it by force. Lucinda gave a harsh laugh, raising her revolver. At her nod, the riders behind her drew their rifles and took aim at Elysia's group. Thunderous cracks split the air as bullets ripped through wooden wheels and churned dirt beneath hooves. "Disperse!" Elysia shouted, her voice cutting through. The volley. She straightened and fired a single shot, her bullet grazing Lucinda's jaw. Lucinda staggered but maintained her balance, spitting blood onto the rocky ground. "You won't make it out alive," Lucinda snarled, her eyes glinting with rage. "This train, these supplies, they belong to McAdam's legacy. Mercury's Crossing chose defiance, but we choose retribution." Elysia forced her jaw to remain steady. She could not let Lucinda believe her shot had succeeded at intimidation. She reloaded swiftly, each motion precise as an anvil strike. "Your vengeance will find no home here. We stand here together. Mortals, blacksmiths, deputies, farmers, all of us. We carve our destiny with our own hands. Now step aside or get run through." Lucinda's lips twisted further into a cruel grin, her wound forgotten. "You stay out of my way, Thorn. But mark my words, as long as you and your people stand, I will stand against you, and I will outlast you." At her words, the riders loaded their rifles, intent on cutting off Mercy's Crossing's lifeline. Elysia raised her hammer, high. Her voice echoed like a bell, cutting through the tension-laden air. "Make one move, and I bring the hammer down." For a brief, suspended moment, time seemed to hold its breath. The wind shifted, carrying the faint cry of a hawk circling overhead, a harbinger of fates yet unwritten. Then, from behind the ridge, the thunder of hoofbeats signaled reinforcements. Rushing to Elysia's aid, men and women from Eastfall, longtime adversaries of McAdam's legacy, now united under Mercy's Crossing's banner. With them rode Blackrock's finest, brandishing gleaming rifles and sharpened lances, escorted by Sparrow's Gulch deputies. Lucinda's jaw clenched. She fired another shot, this time grazing a ranger's hood. The man yelped as blood trickled down his cheek, but he returned fire at once, and bullets pummeled Lucinda's men forward guard, staggering them. Elysia seized the moment. She leaped from her horse, cracking her hammer against the rocky terrain, sending a shockwave rumbling through the pass. The trained craftsmen of Eastfall, veterans of many skirmishes, fanned out like a rising tide, driving Lucinda's bandits backward. Lucinda, staggering from a second bullet wound to her thigh, raged in desperation. She reached for a dagger, strapped to her belt, but Elysia anticipated her movement. With a blur of steel and iron, Elysia's hammer knocked Lucinda's hand aside, sending the dagger skittering against the rocks. At once, a hand wrapped around Lucinda's arm. Grayson Reed, captain of Eastfall's militia, had arrived at the scene. "It's over, Lucinda. Mercy's Crossing brings unity. You bring ruin. Step back." Lucinda glared, blood caking her face as she spat a curse. Her bandits rallied around her, but Eastfall's cavalry's arrival cut off any hope for retreat. One by one, they dropped their weapons in defeat. Elysia took off her glove and approached Lucinda. "You choice at dawn built this conflict, but at dusk I offer you an alternative. We need hands for rebuilding, not weapons for raiding. Swear alliance to Mercy's Crossing and find a new path. This one ends in blood and ash." Lucinda raised her chin, defiance flickering in her hazel eyes. "Your mercy makes you weak," she spat. One day you'll regret this show of leniency. I promise you, when McCadden's blood runs true, Mercy's crossing will fall, and I'll be there to raise the banner." Elysia's gaze hardened. "So be it, but not under my watch. You'll answer for your choices, here and now." Grayson tightened her grip on Lucinda's arm, dragging the bandit captain to her knees in the dust. For a moment the canyon fell silent, save for the river's distant murmur. Then Elysia nodded to Eastfall's cavalry. They secured Lucinda and her men, binding them with ropes strengthened by the forge's smithies. Under the relentless scrutiny of Elysia and Gracian, each captor surrendered weapons, annulling any remaining illusions of power. As the afternoon brightened into a triumphant blaze, Elysia led a formal council between Mercy's Crossing, Eastfall, Blackrock, and Sparrow's Gulch representatives. Under the ancient oak that had once shaded travelers on the road to Devil's Drop, they formed a loose confederation. Pledges of non-aggression, shared trade routes, and mutual defense pacts were signed in ink and blood. When the ink dried, Elysia arose to address the assembled crowd and dignitaries. The emblem of Mercy's Crossing, a hammer striking an anvil, stood embroidered on a fresh banner at her side. She raised her hand, and her voice rang clear. "Today, Mercy's Crossing has rewritten its legacy. We have chosen resilience over ruin, mercy over vengeance, unity over division. To our neighbors, Eastfall, Blackrock, and Sparrow's Gulch, I offer—" Before she could finish, a distant horn blast echoed from a ridge beyond the clearing. The assembled crowd hushed, eyes tracing the horizon. Dust plumes rose in the distance, a column of riders bearing new banners, unfamiliar yet purposeful, Elysia's. Heart tightened as she exchanged a glance with Grayson Reed. The riders approached swiftly, their numbers too many for a simple trading party. Their uniforms were ornate, more disciplined than Lucinda's ragged captains, more threatening than a caravan of merchants. As they drew closer, the lead rider stepped forward, tall, his posture rigid, eyes cold beneath the brim of a polished helmet. He raised his lance. The heraldic crest on his chest, a golden crown atop crossed hammers, soared like fire in Elysia's gaze. "I am Marshal Cedric Avon of the Royal Crown's Legion," his voice boomed, carrying across the clearing. "By decree of the Crown, all towns in this territory must submit themselves to my charge to ensure stability and order. Mercy's Crossing, you will surrender governance and resources to the Crown immediately. Failure to comply will be met with force." Elysia's breath hitched as her gaze flicked to the council members from Eastfall and Blackrock, their jaws tight with concealed alarm. The so-called alliance forged in compassion now faced a far greater threat. An empire that viewed Mercy's Crossing's unity as defiance to be crushed. Her fingers tightened around the hammer's handle at her side, an anchor to her past and future. She planted her feet firmly, refusing to waver. "Marshal Avon," she replied, voice steady. "Mercy's Crossing answered the call for unity and compassion. We have not cowered before bandits. We will not bow before greed wrapped in royal decree. Your presence here is your answer. If you seek peace, sit with us. But if you come to subjugate us, you will find that Mercy's Crossing's hammer falls as swiftly as any sword." A bitter wind whipped through the clearing, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak. The Royal Crown's Legion inched forward, spurred on by Avon's aura of authority. Their polished lances gleamed menacingly. Elysia's allies moved to form a protective circle around her, but she raised a hand to halt them. She glanced at the banners of Eastfall and Blackrock unfurled behind her, symbols of fledgling alliances that had been built on shared struggle. She thought of the forge's flames, the river's roar, the murmur of hope that now pulsed in Mercy's Crossing's heart. "You will not find Mercy's Crossing an easy prize," she said, her voice echoing with unflinching resolve. "We have survived bandits, betrayals, and near extinction. We stand together and our hammers strike falls for any who would smother our flame. If it is war you want, then draw your blades. But if you seek dialogue, let that be forged here now. Marshal Avens, lips curved into a thin, contemptuous smile. You are brave, Blacksmith, but bravery is no substitute for power. The Crown's decree is absolute. Your townspeople, your allies, will stand powerless before the Legion. Elysia's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her hammer resting on her shoulder, its presence as solid and unmovable as her convictions. The Crown will learn that Mercy's Crossing was never built on power alone, but on unity, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of its people. If you challenge us, know this: beyond this clearing lie miles of terrain, hoarded by our allies, and they will stand with us. Mercy's Crossing will not stand alone. A long, tense silence settled across the valley. Then, from the ranks behind, Avon, a voice cracked, "Marshal, they have our banners. We should withdraw. We cannot risk our men." Avon's face hardened. He looked to his men, their polished helmets gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "Hold your ground. This is the Crown's charge. If they refuse, we will enforce the decree." As he raised his hand, a sudden roar erupted from the ridge above. A plume of dust rose as multiple regiments emerged, swift-winged rangers clad in supple leather armor, their bows strung taut, and the newly united cavalry from Eastfall and Blackrock riding into the valley with banners of ally, symbols of the resilience forged in fire at Mercy's Crossing. The rangers took swift positions along the canyon's edge, arrows nocked and ready. Their leader, Aisling Carter, stepped forward, calling out to Elysia, "We stand with you, Blacksmith. The Crown's reign ends at Mercy's Crossing's border." Elysia's heart swelled at the sight of her allies, faces she recognized from the forging fires and the battlefield of unity. The swift-winged rangers' elite archers readied their bows, eyes narrowed on Avon's legion. Marshal Avon's eyes flicked from the rangers to Elysia's assembled archers and cavalry. Impatience and frustration warred across his face. He raised his lance again, but his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. This conflict, Mercy's Crossing, will stand alone when the Crown decides to press forward. Elysia took one step forward, hammer still at her shoulder. "You underestimate the power of unity, but you will not underestimate it for long. May the Crown's heart be tempered by understanding. Our alliance stands on the edge of this pass. And you, who stand before us with polished steel, must realize that Mercy's Crossing's hammer falls not just for Mercy's Crossing, but for every heart in every community that chooses hope over fear." As the sun dipped low, casting deep shadows over the clearing, Elysia and Avon faced off beneath the sentinel oak. Tension throbbed in the air, alive with the hum of destinies entwined. Behind Elysia, the valley breathed in unison. Farmers, blacksmiths, deputies, rangers and cavalry, each personified by the banner of Mercury's Crossing's hammer, a symbol of endurance, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of unity. As the last light of day faded, the world held its breath. The fate of a territory, and perhaps the very essence of its freedom, balanced on a blade's edge. Mercy's Crossing, once a whisper, of fear now roared to life. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.